searching for it. Question. Okay.
Oh, something is open. Maybe that's the problem.
If you need it, maybe. If it's not so, we can
yes, okay.
We can start directly because we are a little bit late.
Share screen. I think the problem is that, sorry,
Ya escribí a professoressa Yashut sobre el problema de...
Mute.
Yes, we hear you now.
Yes, that's right. I just wanted the slide showed from beginning.
Yes.
Can you see it?
Yes, of course. It's right.
Okay, great. So everything works fine.
Okay.
So I'll stop sharing. And yep, I think.
And here we are.
Here we are at last.
Okay. Thank you very much. 9:10. Ahora, buenos días a todas y todos y bienvenidos y bienvenidas al tercer coloquio de Epistemología y primer Congreso de Lógica, Epistemología y Metodología de la Escuela de Filosofía de la Universidad de Costa Rica. Gracias a todos por su presencia. En particular, buenas tardes en este caso a nuestro primer huésped, ¿no? Que será Katarzyna Yashut de la Universidad de Cambridge. Tuvimos un cambio de horario con el profesor Rovelli, que cuanto a los últimos acuerdos hablará a partir desde las 11 de esta mañana en Costa Rica. Le enunciaré ahora un par de reglas fundamentales, muy simples pero muy importantes relativamente al uso de Zoom en nuestro Congreso. Después brindaré una breve introducción al coloquio en general, en español y en inglés. Pasaré la palabra a mi colega y amigo y coorganizador Luis Mesa Chavarría para algunos detalles. Y presentaré brevemente nuestra primera huésped entonces. La presentación de Katarzyna Yashut será solamente en inglés, el talk será en inglés. Cuanto a las reglas, primera cosa, por favor todos mantener apagado el micrófono durante la entera exposición. Si se prevén que serán muchas personas presentes al discurso, a la exposición, sería para mí probablemente imposible identificar rápidamente quién tiene el micrófono abierto. Yo tendría que mutear, silenciar a todos y después dar la palabra otra vez a los speaker, y la cosa sería una interrupción, insomma, incómoda por lo menos. Segunda cosa, para las preguntas y las respuestas tenemos un espacio apósito, ¿no? Al final del talk, de más o menos 30-35 minutos. Las preguntas van obviamente en inglés para nuestra huésped. Para hacer preguntas pueden escribir a mí directamente en privado. Me pueden escribir en privado en el chat, no en el chat público, escribiendo simplemente question o Q. De esta manera yo puedo tener un orden cronológico para hacer la pregunta. So good morning or good evening to everybody here. And welcome to the third colloquium of epistemology and first Congress of Logic, Epistemology and Methodology of the School of Philosophy of the University of Costa Rica. Thank you very much for your presence. And thank you very much particularly to our first guest, Katarzyna Jaszczyt. Thank you to share your ideas and your time with us today. I will expose a couple of very important and very simple rules about the use of Zoom for our Congress. Then I will give you a little introduction to the whole event, and later introduction to our first guest. I will make the introduction in Spanish and in English, then I will give the word to my friend and colleague Luis Mesa Chavarria for some details, and then the presentation of our guest will be just in English because the talk will be in English, the question and answer will be in English. What about the rules? First rule, very important, please switch off your microphones and hold your microphone switched off for the whole time of the talk, because if many people are coming in, it will be quite uneasy for me to locate the person with the open microphone. And in this sense, I would be obliged to mute everybody, inclusive our speaker, and then give another time the word to her. It would be, not, of course, so a little bit disturbing. Second thing, for question and answer, we have provided an appropriate time after the talk. It will be about half an hour, a little bit more. Make a question, please write to me directly, privately, through the chat, not publicly. Write me privately to through the chat question or simply Q. So I will have a chronological order that I can use for your question. I think these are the main rules, and we can begin with the introduction to the event, the general introduction to the event. Este tercer coloquio de epistemología, primer congreso de lógica, epistemología y metodología, se desarrolla a partir de la iniciativa del colega, amigo y coorganizador del presente evento, Juan Diego Moya Bedoya, quien inauguró un coloquio anual de epistemología en el febrero del 2019. La intención general detrás del proyecto fue orientar e invitar a los estudiantes de la Escuela de Filosofía de la Universidad de Costa Rica al estudio sistemático de esa rama de la filosofía que, en primer lugar, jugó un papel central en aquellos sistemas de pensamiento de la era moderna que resultaron profundamente comprometidos con la tarea de justificar, fundar y definir como filosofía natural la gran empresa de la ciencia moderna emergente. Nuestro esfuerzo va en la misma dirección y representa el intento de modernizar los intereses y temas fundamentales de nuestra escuela en el sentido de una filosofía científicamente informada, capaz de objetividad y constituyendo un conocimiento aumentativo y acumulativo. Fiel al espíritu de esta primera experiencia, nuestro coloquio Congreso se propone así como la construcción, siempre en fieri, de un puente entre la filosofía y la ciencia, canesas naturales, formales y o sociales. En este sentido, el contacto, el intercambio y posiblemente la colaboración con otras instituciones universitarias de todo el mundo representa una condición sine qua non para nuestro crecimiento, hasta contribuir activamente a los temas más actuales y a los debates internacionales más avanzados, como aquello cuya exposición asistiremos en estos días. This third colloquium of epistemology, first Congress of Logic, Epistemology and Methodology, develops from the initiative of the colleague, friend, and co-organizer of the present event, Juan Diego Moya Bedoya, who inaugurated an annual colloquium in epistemology in February 2019. The general intention behind the project was to invite the students of the School of Philosophy of the University of Costa Rica to the systematic study of that branch of philosophy that first of all played a central role in the system of thought of the modern era. The system of thought committed to justify, found, and define as natural philosophy the great enterprise of the emerging modern science. Our effort goes in the same direction and represents the attempt to modernize the fundamental interests and topics of our school in the sense of a scientifically informed philosophy, capable of objectivity and constituting an augmentative cumulative knowledge. With loyalty to the spirit of the first experiences, our colloquium Congress is intended as well as the construction, always in progress, of a robust bridge between philosophy and sciences, be they natural, formal, and/or social. In this sense, contact, exchange, and possibly collaboration with other university institutions around the world represents a conditio sine qua non for our growth, intended to actively contribute to the most current topics and to the most advanced international debates, such as those whose exposition we will enjoy today and in the next day. Now I give the word to my friend and colleague Luis Mesa for some details. Please, Luis.
Thank you very much, Professor Boccafoli, and thank you all for being here with us today. So now I will just briefly refer to the nature of the event. So what exactly do we mean by a Congress on Logic, Epistemology, and Methodology? So I think it's relevant to note that here these categories are being used as umbrella terms. For example, in the case of logic, it is used to refer to works that fall under both philosophical and mathematical logic, as well as to closely related fields such as the philosophy of logic, metamathematics, the philosophy of mathematics, and formal or mathematical philosophy. That is, the methodological orientation that seeks to apply mathematical methods to treat philosophical problems. On the other hand, epistemology refers here both to the common use in English, meaning the general theory of knowledge, and to the traditional use in Spanish, more akin to the general philosophy of science. Likewise, it is used to include the different existing epistemological traditions and branches, such as normative epistemology, naturalized epistemology, social epistemology, and formal epistemology. Finally, in the case of methodology, it is not used here only to mean the reflection of the methods of the sciences, but also in order to capture work in one of the fastest growing philosophical fields, as is the case of metaphilosophy, also called the philosophy of philosophy, whose main branch is precisely philosophical methodology. In all of these cases, we're also striving to visualize the collaborative work currently done between several of these disciplines and orientations. Finally, we are organizing this academic event with a dual purpose. The first, to open a spot in Central America for the presentation and discussion of some of the current lines of research in different branches of logic and contemporary analytic philosophy, including those produced abroad and those produced in our own region. And secondly, we hope to present to the community many examples of the current mutual and fertile collaboration between philosophy and the sciences, without pretending to reduce the former to the later. So, thank you very much. I will now switch to Spanish. Bueno, muchas gracias al profesor Boccafoli y muchas gracias a todas y a todos ustedes por estar aquí presentes el día de hoy. Hablaré ahora brevemente sobre la naturaleza del evento. ¿A qué nos referimos exactamente con un congreso de lógica, epistemología y metodología? Me parece relevante destacar que estas categorías están siendo empleadas aquí como términos genéricos. En el caso de lógica, lo empleamos aquí para aludir a trabajos de investigación que se circunscriben o bien dentro de la lógica filosófica o bien dentro de la lógica matemática, al igual que para aquellos que corresponden a disciplinas estrechamente vinculadas, como lo son la filosofía de la lógica, la filosofía de las matemáticas, la metamatemática y la filosofía formal o filosofía matemática. Esto es, aquella orientación metodológica que busca aplicar métodos matemáticos en la resolución de problemas filosóficos. Por su parte, el término epistemología alude aquí tanto a su uso común en inglés, fungiendo en cuanto que teoría general del conocimiento, como a su uso tradicional en español, más estrechamente vinculado con la filosofía general de las ciencias. Similarmente, toma en consideración las distintas tradiciones y ramas epistemológicas, como lo son la epistemología normativa, la epistemología naturalizada, la epistemología social y la epistemología formal. Y en último lugar, el término metodología no se emplea aquí solamente en referencia a la reflexión sobre los métodos de las ciencias, sino también con el fin de capturar a una de las disciplinas filosóficas emergentes de mayor crecimiento, como lo es el caso de la metafilosofía o también denominada filosofía de la filosofía, y en particular a su rama principal, la metodología filosófica. Ahora bien, organizamos este evento académico con un doble propósito. El primero consiste en abrir un espacio en Centroamérica para la presentación y discusión de algunas de las líneas de investigación más actuales en distintas ramas de la lógica y de la filosofía analítica contemporánea, tanto las que se producen en el extranjero cuanto las que se producen en nuestra región. Y en segundo lugar, esperamos dar a conocer a la comunidad distintos ejemplos de la fértil colaboración actualmente existente entre la filosofía y las ciencias, sin pretender una reducción de la primera a la segunda. De nuevo, muchas gracias a todos y a todas, y sin más por el momento, le regreso la palabra al profesor Bocafoli.
Muchas gracias, Luis. Now we'll switch to English. We'll talk in English because our first speaker will talk in English. We'll introduce you to Kasia Jaszczut. Katarzyna Jaszczut is professor of linguistics and philosophy of language at the University of Cambridge. She's also professor and director of studies in linguistics at Newnham College, Cambridge. She has published several monographs, books and articles on topics of semantics, meta-semantics, pragmatics, and philosophy of language in general. She's the author of The False Semantic, a theory of discourse interpretation, and she's the general editor of Time in Language and Thought, a book series. Her current research focuses on two projects mainly. First of all, the semantics and metaphysics of time. And second, the new concept of a functional proposition that captures meaning in discourse. A recent research on topics of meta-semantics and meta-pragmatics to appear in Rethinking Being Rising was founded in part by the Cambridge Humanities Research Grant Scheme. I'm very happy to have with us today Professor Katarzyna Jaszczut with a talk about the apparent flow of human time from semantics to metaphysics. So we're talking about the first of our two main projects of research in philosophy. Katarzyna Jaszczut proposes to bring together discussions on the metaphysics of time and the passage of time with linguistic discussions on the concept of time to address the question of why time seems dynamic. So, thank you very much, Professor Jaszczut, to be with us. I hope my pronunciation is okay. I try to do my best, and I give you right now the word for your talk. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lorenzo. Yes, pronunciation is absolutely perfect. The name is horrendously difficult due to the history of different pronunciations from different European countries, but your pronunciation was perfect. First of all, hello everyone, and thank you very much to the organizers, to Lorenzo and other organizers for inviting me. I am, as you know from the introduction, a linguist as well as a philosopher, so I hope to present today more philosophical aspects of my work to you. Hopefully some of them will interest you. Before I start, let me just say that my talk is going to be on my academia site from tomorrow. So if you want to go through it again at your pace or check the references to the corresponding article, then you are very welcome. Now, my connection is pretty poor. I'm glad you can hear me. I can see you perfectly, but I hear every other sentence. So we may have to resort to questions being typed. We'll see how it goes after I finish. But if you don't hear me, please shout, either interrupt me or put your hand up or chat, because I just want to know if the problem persists and is on your side as well. Okay, so I'll share the screen now. Is everything still okay? Can you hear me? Okay, brilliant, brilliant. Okay, slide show from beginning, and I need my pen. Okay, I have my pen. Good. I can start now. So as I said, I'm a linguist as well as a philosopher, so I'm interested in this project. I have, as you heard as well, several projects. One of them is the theory of default semantics, but that will be a topic for a separate, more linguistic talk. I'll just touch upon it today. But in this project, which has been going on for a while, some of you may know my 2009 book representing time. I'm interested in connections between how we represent time in natural languages, how we speak about time in languages, then what it tells us about the human concept of time, and then this human concept of time, which we can glean through. We can get at through the linguistic expressions of time. I want to see how it relates to real time. That is, whether that helps us to reconcile some incompatibilities in our understanding of both. That it might be worth remembering these terms from the beginning. I'm going to talk about time M, metaphysical time, so real time. Then time with an index E will be for epistemological time, so that's human time, and you'll see why epistemological in due course. And finally, linguistic time, time L. And that, it's worth remembering, that's not tense, it's time. It's temporal reference in discourse. Okay, let me just organize my slides so that I could see them all. The structure of my talk is going to be as follows. So there'll be three parts. In the first part, I'm going to look at the relation between static time M and what we perceive or experience or feel, whatever, as a dynamic time E, because of course, depending on the orientation, some people say you experience time, feel time, some say that no, you experience something else, some say we represent time, some that we don't, so here one has to be careful. Anyway, dynamic is here with an asterisk because you will see by the end of this talk that there is a lot to say about this dynamicity, and in the end it sort of pretty much disappears. So as I progress, the title says from semantics to metaphysics, but I'm actually going to start with metaphysics so that you could see by the end how semantics can explain certain questions in the domains of epistemology and metaphysics. So in the process, I'm going to help myself to some interesting ideas by other people, so as not to reinvent the wheel, which will provide the background for my later account. So first I'm going to talk about indexicality of time and of the ego and emergentism. Then in the second part, I'll talk about our understanding of a real time using the idea of meta-representation. And finally, I'm going to tackle this dynamic asterisk time, E, remember that's the epistemological time, the concept, the human time, in order to understand its on the level of concepts. And for that, I'm going to look at time in natural languages as an explanans. So we'll see by the end that the human complex concept of time, it will be very important that it's a complex concept, will have static building blocks. Okay, so part one, my time. One of my favorite mottos here from Flaherty. As I said, here there's plenty of fantastic literature, wonderful literature. For example, Jenan Ismail's How Physics Makes Us Free. If you don't know it, I recommend it wholeheartedly. I use it to focus on my assumption that we have to talk not only about the indexicality of time here, but also indexicality of the thinking agent, the I, or as Ismail says, the microlaws create the space for emergent systems with robust capabilities for self-governance, or self-governance involves the creation of an internal point of view on the world. And so it opens up the psychological space for the growth of the self. So in other words, she's trying to reconcile the level of microlaws of physics where time is static with the emergent reality of us humans, saying that these can be reconciled. So that's pretty well worked out in the literature, in philosophy. Another source here would be Craig Callender, What Makes Time Special, his book here, which again was worth reading, who simply says that flowing time is the most sensible explanation of reality that humans came up with. I quote here, time is that direction on the manifold of events in which we can tell the strongest or most informative stories. So basically time appears to be dynamic because I make sense of static time in that way. And as such, it is dynamic when it's subsumed under the first person indexical. Now, when you look at time in this way, then there's some interesting characteristic of first person perspective, which also begin to apply to time, such as immunity to error through misidentification. What it means is this, that for those, I'm not trying to be patronizing, but I'm just, for those of you who don't know the ideas, because I know this and it is an interdisciplinary conference, I'm going to present them briefly. So, okay, when I think of myself and I think I have a headache or I have a toothache, then I can't be wrong. I can't be wrong because it has to be my toothache, my headache. So this is immunity to error through misidentification of me as someone else. But when I look at myself in the mirror and I think to myself, I'm wearing a red dress, then this thought is not immune because this may be, unbeknownst to me, this may be a clear glass and there's somebody on the other side who looks like me from a distance and is wearing a red dress while I'm wearing my green jumper. So this kind of belief about the self is not immune. In other words, here one can entertain thoughts about oneself from an internal or from an external perspective. And this internal perspective, as François Recanati says, has this property of immunity. And now this is, when you think of linguistic examples, it's like in English, remembering doing something as opposed to remembering that I've done it. So arguably, the latter, this one, is open to misidentification. I may remember that I recommended a holiday to Italy, whereas it was actually my husband who did it. But remembering doing something is somewhat different. So now what's interesting is that analogous to the first person beliefs, time beliefs can be immune to error from misidentification as present, past, or future, or they can lack this immunity. So we can have not only this indexing under the self, but also interesting characteristics, similar characteristics, which you'll see later will allow me to propose a semantic representation. This is what I call the double indexicality of time. We have the external perspective. So for example, my driving test is long in the past. I passed it long time ago. But then if I have a dream or a nightmare that I have to take my test, I wake up and strongly believe that I haven't yet passed it, it's still in the future, then I have this internal perspective, which shows us that an event is externally, which I call covertly, that will be important later, in the past, and internally, overtly in the future. So that's common sense. We all experience that, but I think it's going to be very important for the semantic representation. Okay, so that's my meta-indexing to the ego. Now, when we talk about time, it's almost impossible not to talk about McTaggart and his A and B theory. I'm not going to, or even C series of time. I'm not going to spend much time on it, just to tell you that according to the A theory, real time flows. There is real past, present, and future, or at least some of these are real according to different A theorists. Whereas in B theory, real time doesn't flow. All there is relations earlier than, later than, but time doesn't flow. Now, some people now propose also C theory, which is based on McTaggart's C series, according to which time doesn't have a direction. So that will be going even closer to what modern physics tells us. But what I find interesting is that people actually talk about real time as not flowing, and our time as flowing, and they don't think about this incongruity very, very much. I think here the onus of proof is on the dissociationists rather than convergentists. So taking time M and time E to be both static or both dynamic preempts the need to explain the incompatibility. So if we can have a strong argument for static time, then this will be sort of a side benefit. In other words, this is what I mean here. There are two plausible combinations: perspectival dynamic time, transcendental dynamic, and this, of course, physics tells us is not likely. Or we can have perspectival static and transcendental static, which, of course, our common sense tells us that is unlikely. But I'll try to show that there is a level at which they are both static. Now, first of all, since I'm appealing here to common sense, let's appeal to common sense and science. It is not unquestionable that we think that time really passes. And why is that? When you think of our popular knowledge of Einstein's theory and how long it has been around, about 100 years, we as humans in linguistic societies, in societies, we have increasing awareness of Einstein's theory of special relativity. We have also increasing awareness of people like Carlo Rovelli, whom we hope to see soon, tells us about static time. So it sort of percolates to common awareness more and more day after day. Also, we don't really observe any absolute non-deictic direction of time flow. Neither do we observe any absolute non-deictic rate of flow. As we know, the rate is quite subjective, how we experience it or feel it. Directions such as the past is behind us, the future is ahead, are culturally imprinted, they vary. In plenty of languages, some languages, the future is behind us because we don't see it. The past is in front of us, like in Aymara, in ancient Greek, and in some other languages. So we see the past, but we don't see the future behind. Also, as I just mentioned, the experience of the interval is subjective. So this also tells us there is something fishy about how we feel the passing of time. Okay, so that raises some questions, such as where exactly does this dynamicity come from, and how crucial is dynamicity to human beliefs about time? This slide is going to be important. So this is where we are at the moment. This is my summary where we are now from the ego perspective. So in view of the popular awareness, even if grossly incomplete, because we are not physicists, of the static conception of space-time, I believe that real time doesn't pass. It's a dimension of space-time. I also believe that my time, human time, passes. I believe that this passage can be objectively measured. And I also believe that the objective measurement of time, E, can differ from the gauged duration reported by the experiencing subjects. So we want to make sense of all this together. Now, concerning the last point of subjectivity, there's plenty of evidence that we experience or feel that passage or whatever it is that we feel differently. For example, Flaherty has lots of empirical evidence from about 700 subjects that when the density of experience is low, then time passes quickly. When the density of experience is high, then time passes slowly. So for example, when you go on holiday and do a lot of sightseeing in a day, at the end of the day, you wonder, oh, has it only really been one day? So much has happened. So this is documented. Also, there is this so-called kappa effect that when the physical distance increases, then the feeling of time increases. Or if you present something to people at certain scale, then that affects the experience of time as well. And of course, emotions and other mental activities. So when you wait for your dental appointment, root canal, then of course it drags, and then you just, before you can explain, thank goodness it's over. Now, okay, so where are we now? We are at this meta-indexicality. Time E is double indexical. The past, the present, and the future are such, not only with respect to the thinking agent as assessed from the external perspective, but also as assessed from the agent's internal perspective. And these two perspectives can come apart, as I've just shown you through these examples. Now, as I said, I'm a philosopher but also a linguist, mainly semanticist, philosopher of language. And I'm interested in representing all this in the sense of semantic conceptual representations. And here, beware philosophers, because I'm not talking about representationalism or non-representationalism about time. I'm talking about representing our concept and thoughts about time. So we are in the level of concepts. Okay, so we need an operator, I think, that will capture the relation between time E and time M, because this is what we really want to know, how it is that there is our time and there is real time. And here I started with non-representationalist about time, Giuliano Torengo, who has this idea of a primitive phenomenal modifier. So this is his phenomenal modifier, which is like gives us a function from real time to human time. So this is a modifier which gives us like a phenomenon. And it is, as I said, primitive phenomenal modifier. I think that the idea of function is good. Non-representationalism is interesting, but I'm using this idea for a very different purpose, as you'll see in a moment. But first, let me repeat the slide, which I then flagged earlier as important. So let's have a look at it again. So in view of this, our popular awareness of and in view of popular physics, teaching at school, media, I don't know, Scientific American, and so on, then in view of popular awareness of the static conception of time, I believe that real time doesn't pass. Our time passes, the passage can be objectively measured, but I also experience that passage differently depending on the occasion. So, in order to represent what's going on, because remember, I want to go all the way to the concepts which are conveyed through linguistic expressions in different languages. I'm using two operators. So it's no longer a phenomenal modifier, it's no longer primitive, it's this. We have here, first, because they are nested, okay, we have objective covered qualifier, which simply stands for passing time. So that's objective, but it's covered because we don't have online awareness. Where we have online awareness is this here in the subjective overt experience of time. So we have real time in the scope of overt qualifier, and all this in the scope of the subjective covered qualifier. So to go back, we have, this has the widest scope and this has narrower scope, and then we have time M in order to get to time E. And this will be a good starting point for me to build my representation earlier. As I said, they are not phenomenal qualifiers anymore. And why? Because, not because I have a stance on representationalism, I really don't, but it's not my, it's above my pay grade really, it's not my field, but because as you will see, experience of time may be more complex and the concept of time may be more complex than that. So in fact, the question as such on the level at which I want to be may not arise. So from now on, I'll be talking about beliefs and concepts, which again is compatible with what Terengo says, but for different reasons. He wants to move to level of beliefs. I'm not going to talk about the sensation of the passage of time much more here. He says that there is no sensation of the passage of time, merely belief. So he has this deflationism. He says that the flow comes from the attitude toward content, but be that as it may, I'm moving to the level of beliefs and associated concepts. And here, as I said, I'm employing linguistic evidence and linguistic semantic analysis of expressions in different languages, because these are the tangible externalizations of these beliefs. I can actually see it, hear it, see it written, hear it said. So that's something tangible, concrete that we can start with. Now, beliefs are good. The level of beliefs is good. We represent the world to ourselves, and the phenomenal aspect can distort these representations, as we know, but we can also go back and check our representations against new representations and find them wanting. This is if we are on representational story. For example, we can notice temporal compression, protracted duration, which I talked about earlier. And at this point, we form beliefs about the content of our experience. And from now on, I'm going to talk about the concept time. In cognitive semantics, it's standard to use capitals, block capitals for concepts. So this will be corresponding to my earlier time E. This will be the concept of time when you see it on a future slide. But first this. First, let's have a look at this again. So we have my qualifiers, we have time M, and that gives us time E. But how does it help us? We still have this equal sign, which is really not very informative. We still have what people called inherent inconsistency between flow and the lack of flow, or apparent inherent inconsistency, which I hope to show that not really that obvious. So first I quote from Ismail again, from Jenan Ismail, static versus dynamic. Is it really such a clash? She says this, I quote, the apparent conflict between the familiar flowing time of everyday experience and the static time of the block universe has a stubborn way of reasserting itself as a substantive and all-important metaphysical disagreement, even in my own mind. It is a reminder of the constant tension in the human between the transcendent and embedded viewpoints, which is in turn the product of the peculiarly human form of mindedness. So notice constant tension. This is portrayed here as a clash, as something which we have to live with. And we have emergent level of complex systems such as humans, but nothing we can do about the clash. Okay, so on this note, I'm moving to the second part of my talk, meta-representing. Again, as I said, I'm going to adapt here some ideas which are useful. Not all of this will have to be invented from scratch, because, for example, Dan Sperber has this brilliant explanation of cultural beliefs. He's an anthropologist who works on different, among other things, explanation of cultural beliefs belonging to different cultures and their rationality. So something that may look irrational from the perspective of one culture starts being rational when we see how it is actually believed. Okay, so for example, when I hear that red giants become white dwarfs, even if I know some astrophysics, the chances I don't understand it fully because I don't know enough astrophysics. I know that these are some sort of forms of stars, celestial bodies, and so on, but I don't know enough. So for Sperber, this would be a semi-propositional belief, a belief which is not fully propositional. I read it, I hear about it, I put it in quotes for future understanding, trusting the source, let's say my physics teacher, but not fully understanding it. And for my purpose today, the same happens with time is just a dimension of static space-time. Okay, but then when it comes to curved spaces and so on, we don't all understand it to the same degree. And the universe is governed by symmetrical laws. Again, no matter how many times you read Hugh Price or some other books, there is still something which you understand less than people who are experts do. So these are semi-propositional beliefs. They are reflective. They are not intuitive. People are aware of holding them, and they hold them in virtue of holding some second-order beliefs about them. And they are normally popular representations of scientific representations of reality. Or for him, as I said, what he looked at was cultural beliefs, like a tribesman in Ethiopia will tell you, there is a dragon living in the woods, the dragon has a golden heart, go and kill the dragon. And then you understand that there is something there, some danger, but they don't know what it is, so they sort of put it in quotes for future understanding. So this will be very important, because this is precisely what happens with the static time, that we try to make sense of it in quotes. So these are these popular assumptions that embrace basic tenets of special and general relativity, and we afford them this semi-propositional meta-representational status. This conception of static block universe has such a status of semi-propositional beliefs, representational, not factual, semi-propositional, not propositional. Now, why is it important? When you look at my equations again, we put real time in quotes for future understanding. We know something from popular physics, but not everything that there is to be known. So human time equals real time in quotes. That's okay, according to that theory I just showed you. But then where does it lead us? We know real time doesn't flow. You put this equation, put it in quotes, and our time flows. So again, we are not at the end of the story. This is much worse, isn't it? This is where we are back to that quotation from Janan Ismail. So I hope it is, we can say more about human time doesn't flow in order to shed some more, at least a tiny bit more light on what this equation means. And here a note to the next speaker, that time will emerge from a world without time. And here I will wear the hat, a linguist's hat, more and more as this part 3 progresses. I'm hoping not to speak for much longer, but I think, yeah, we have time, no pun intended. My assumptions here are going to be these. This is important, that forms of temporal reference employed in natural languages give us a window on the human concept of time. Without this, we can't go any further. We have to assume that what we see in speech, in discourse, in written language, actually tells us something about the human concept of time. But we can't really assume strong relativity. This would, again, not be very scientific, because we know that we all have the same mental architecture and the same kinds of mental operations. So we have to remember this, that how we speak about time only tells us about this so-called online thinking, not about the ultimate properties of temporal concepts. So this is what Dan Slobin calls thinking for speaking, how we assemble our thoughts for externalizing them in conversation. So there is a link, but there's a link that has to be unpacked further. Otherwise, as I said, we would be relativists. So here, thinking for speaking, or we can also add here experiencing for thinking. Why is that? Because we may experience the same things. We may look at the same objects as, for example, speakers of Yucatec Maya. I'm closer to that area, Mexico, Belize. I hope maybe somebody in the audience actually speaks that language and knows that language. So if we look at a bottle and a plank of wood or a pancake, we experience them in speakers of English as bottle, plank, or pancake, but speakers of Yucatec Maya will experience them as plastic, wood, or maize, because they categorize by substance, not by function. So this experiencing for thinking will here differ. Now, we also have to remember that the concepts we employ in thinking for speaking are often complex. They are not primitive concepts. They are not atomic, subatomic building blocks. So even if they are monolexical, even if it's one word, they can have conceptual atoms from which they are built. We don't know the constituency of these complex concepts, but there are various interesting theories. For example, there's Wierzbicka's natural semantic meta-language, who looked at over 100 languages and managed to distill a few scores of such basic concepts, which are building blocks for then concepts, even lexical concepts in different languages. There are some other theories on the market as well, and that goes back to the 1960s, to the lexical decomposition. So there's plenty of literature on these atoms of meaning, and of course plenty of opposition, like Jerry Fodor's. Now, another thing we have to remember when we look at languages is that not all languages use the same devices for temporal reference. In some languages, we may have lots of adverbials, such as yesterday, now. In others, we may have tenses, aspect. Tense aspect is this internal temporality of the situation, such as whether any eventuality is extended in time or not, whether it's completed or not. In other languages, we may have mostly pragmatics, mostly temporal reference left to context. You may not even have grammatical tenses, but context or some kind of defaults, conventions, will tell us whether the speaker meant past, present, or future, or even whether the speaker meant remote past or immediate past. And this is an example I'm going to use here in this talk. As I said, in languages such as English, we have grammatical tenses and grammatical aspect, this sort of internal temporality, extended or not, finished or not. But there are plenty of languages which are tenseless. So we have, for example, Paraguayan Guarani, Yucatec Maya, Mandarin Chinese. I gave you here a few other examples, the lesser known ones with some explanation of the family and region. These languages tend to have aspects, so they have this internal temporality, finished, completed or not, and so on. They have mood markers, modality, they have evidentiality, which means that they will encode in the grammar the source of evidence, whether the state or event was witnessed firsthand or whether it was only heard about secondhand, and so on. They may have temporal adverbials, yesterday, and so on. Or they may mostly rely on pragmatic inference from context, or some default interpretations. There will be always also languages in which tenses are optional, like Thai. In Thai, both tense and aspect are optional, and quite often the modal markers which are used, like can, must, give us some strong default interpretations, such as these tend to be about the past default, because this is most certain, concrete, and important. Then it moves, then it moves to the present and the future. Sometimes it's the present if it's depending if it's a state, because it has most highest reference, let's say, to what we are talking about, to the topic of conversation. Anyway, some examples. So in Hausa, for instance, when a sentence like this can be translated as she is, or was, or will be playing. And so as you can see, what's foregrounded in the grammar is not really absolute tense, whether it happened, will happen, or is happening, but something else, namely the aspect that it's a continuous event, that playing is an extended event through time, whereas the exact temporal location is not foregrounded at all. In Yucatec Maya, again, this is quite interesting because, again, here we have no absolute tense. What we have is the marker of whether it's immediate, but it doesn't tell us if it's immediate in the past or immediate relatively in the extended now, present, or immediate future, just immediate, and the incomplete status of the event. So we have in this sentence, this can mean I have just read a paper, or I had or will have just read the paper. So again, as you see, location, absolute location is not foregrounded. And this is how we get relative tenses, proximate, relative future. So proximate, it tells us that it's not far off from now, but the future will be relative on something else, which happened, will happen, or is happening, and the same with some other combinations. These are just some examples of these combinations. Now, West Greenlandic, an Eskimo language, similarly, we can have, for example, present or past time reference conveyed through factual modes like introducing, presupposing, inquiring, and then further disambiguation provided by aspect and by the context, by inference, pragmatic inference from the context. The future, interestingly, again, is rendered by markers such as be likely or begin, let us. There is no future tense. So I looked at this in detail a few years ago for my book Representing Time, 2009 OUP book, and some other articles. where I concluded, and I had some not only evidence, but theoretical argumentation, that this tells us that human time is really essentially epistemic, a model concept. So it is not the concept of flowing time or temporal location that is foregrounded in languages, but rather some other concepts, such as the status of this eventuality. Eventuality means event or state or process. So status as completed or in progress, and the attitudes such as necessity, obligation, wish, and the kind of strength of evidence we have about this event or state. And they are related to temporal reference when we think of time in this meta-indexical way, which I introduced in part 1 of my talk, as inextricably linked to, subsumed under the ego, the self, with its attitudes of wishing, wanting, obligation, desire to express the degree of commitment. This is important, based on the source of evidence. So then I came up with this idea of time as graded commitment to events. I'm sure other people came up with this as well, but I sort of have commitment to events, but mine was graded commitment, where the degree of commitment comes from the linguistic expression plus context. Remember this lexicon grammar pragmatics trades off, because you can have information not just from what you say, but from the entire situation. And then I was also saying that based on all that evidence, we may be able to actually assign degrees of commitment if we had really big corpora. So that's something to do for computational linguistics, or maybe for neurosemantics, neuropragmatics. When we have lots of evidence, we can see how people speak, in what context, and what it tells us about this degree of commitment. So as such, what I'm saying here is that time is modal epistemic. This, you may remember, I started with time M, time E, time L, and this is going to tell us more when we start with time L about time E, which then will help us with that equation sign I had before. So this is what it means. Events can be understood or remembered to different degrees. They can also be anticipated more or less strongly. Inference about events can be monotonic, non-monotonic, and as such can be more or less trustworthy. This is what I call the modal supervenience of time, or the supervenience of concept of time on the concept of epistemic modality. So the definitional characteristics will be from there. Now, when we look at languages and at this strong modality, the fact that time as such doesn't even figure in these sentences which I gave you, then it appears that, to me at least, I draw the conclusion from my various arguments that the concept of time rests on building blocks that mark such degrees of epistemic commitment, the degrees to which are prepared to endorse statements about the past, the present, and the future. Okay, so back to my equation. By the way, Giuliano Torengo didn't have any equations. That was earlier on, it was just my interpretation of what he's saying about the phenomenal modifier. So remember, my subjective qualifier objective of time M, real time gives us time E. And remember that I wanted to be on the level of beliefs for good reasons. And now when we are on the level of beliefs, so this just gives us the level which we are on, the index belief. Then we get to the concept of time. Remember, block capitals mean the concept. So this, on the level of belief, we have the concept of time. Right, and in virtue of what I have just said, I suppose I should probably present it in a flowchart next time. Or for me, since the time E is a complex concept, then we want to know its composition. And once we know it, then decomposition of concepts such as past, present, and future will follow from that. So it looks fairly promising to me. Now, as I said, we must remember that when we move from natural languages and these different languages, some tensed, less, some tensed, we must beware that that doesn't lead us to relativity, because there is no evidence of that. So that slide is a reminder here that language diversity doesn't have to lead to the conclusion of linguistic relativity. That is to a concept of time for language E and L for language X, which is language dependent, because while on the surface languages display significant cross-linguistic variation, this variation only reflects complex molecular concepts. Remember, time is a complex concept. It has these model epistemic building blocks. And such complex concepts are composed of universal conceptual building blocks. So a bit like in texts on lexical semantics for undergraduates, you get the concept of a bachelor being plus human plus male minus married plus adult. So these are these conceptual building blocks. So Stephen Levinson coined the term neo-Worthianism. He looked at spatial reference, but it seems to me that there is no reason why we shouldn't use the same analysis for time, and nobody really has done that. So I think if we accept, actually Levinson is not even fully committed to neo-Worthianism, because he says he finds languages in which you can't translate certain spatial relations onto others using these building blocks. So that's still incomplete. But I'm just putting it here to show you that we don't have to be relativists. We can be universalists about human thought on the level of those building blocks. Right, so about time, that tells us that time E revolves around epistemic modality, time E rests on building blocks that mark such degrees of commitment, the degrees to which we are prepared to endorse statements about the past, the present, and the future. Putting it all together, we have the concept of time across 3 domains, which appears as an emergent property on the higher molecular level of human concepts. What time did I start? Can I talk for a few more minutes?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, there won't be
more if you want.
Slides, but I just want to show you this picture, how it all gets together. So putting it together, time doesn't flow on the level of conceptual building blocks, but it flows on the level of their molecular combinations, species-specific thoughts, and the culture and language-specific expressions. So now, some of you might think I'm just kicking the unknown to a different level. Some of you may think that I'm contributing to the story. I think I'm contributing, but certainly this is still not finished. But what it does allow me to do, wearing my linguist's hat, is go further in the semantics, in my conceptual semantics. Remember, we were here on the level of beliefs, and this is the concept of time. And this slide, if you are tired by now, look away, make yourself a cup of coffee. But if you want to hear my other story from semantics, then bear with me for a minute, and I'll tell you about this slide, really with the speed of light. So now what I do wearing my linguist's hat, I unpack this concept as this. So this tells me that the concept of time is a complex concept which we can further unpack as epistemic modality. And again, so as not to reinvent the wheel, I use and misuse Paul Grice's operator of acceptability. He wrote a really quite an unknown book, Aspects of Reason, published posthumously, unfinished, in which he tried to bring different kinds of modality, subsume them under one acceptability operator. So he will have, it is acceptable that it is the case that P, he is acceptable that let it be that P. I suppose many of you probably know it in this audience, since a lot of you are epistemologists. But so yes, he talked about practical and alethic modality. I'm applying it here to epistemic. I can apply it to deontic modality as well. But as I say, I use it very differently. First of all, I assign a degree to this acceptability, because remember, I talked about the degrees of commitment when we talk about the past, the future, or now. Within each domain, we have different degrees of commitment. I can say, I went to London yesterday, John went to London yesterday, John may have gone, must have gone, and so on. So there will be different degrees. I need these degrees here. And also, I don't operate on the level of propositions, because I want the level of how we speak. I want the level of the main meaning, which I call somewhere as functional proposition. So my sigma stands for so-called merger representation in my default semantics. In fact, Lorenzo asked me to give a talk about that, but since he gave me an option, I decided not to do it. You can invite me again if you want, and I can talk about default semantics, but today it's just one little slide. So I talk about merger representations because I'm more interested at the level of what we convey in our speech acts. That is, we have what we utter in words, but we also have our inferences in context, default meanings, we have the scenario, we have defaults like cognitive defaults. And here my background in Husserl, where I wrote my PhD long time ago on DPhil, I should say, if Oxford people are in the audience, on Husserl. So I use this concept of strong and weak intentionality as well. All this, it gives us some meaning, which language itself, propositions in sentences won't give us. Sentences give us a bit, which can be then sort of further elaborated on, or even overridden if our speech act is indirect. So, okay, so we have, it is acceptable to the degree delta pertaining to a certain linguistic expression in context, that it is the case that sigma. This is what it means. So this is where I take it in my linguistic work. In default semantics, I can also represent then tense time mismatches, because notice I'm no longer on the level of sentences. I can use, I can explain, which formal dynamic semantics theories still don't, what we convey by I go back to the UK tomorrow. Oh, I have this as well. Again, look out if you are not interested, but this is just an example of my merger representation, that I have sources of information. Not all of them are language. CD, cognitive default, proper names by default come with the strongest intentionality. Like in Kaplan. So we have this, then we have it is acceptable to the degree pertaining to tenseless future. Tenseless future is go, I go tomorrow, not I will go. And again, the processes from different sources of information, different processes tell us what to do with such a sentence. So this is word meaning sentence structure, this is conscious pragmatic inference about primary meaning, and so on. So just a taster, if you are interested, that's a subject for another talk. And really, another slide to give you a bigger picture where it leads. Today I presented this. Today I presented this sort of reduction or connection. I started with time in metaphysics, then epistemology, and then try to shed some light from language in order to go back through these to real time, how we can draw this equation. But I also have a story on this level, as well as stories about so-called vertical reduction. So this is the bigger picture of what I was talking today, as well as this. And you can read about it in my other paper. So this is my really final slide, summing up. Time flows on the emergent level of the ego perspective, and this flow is explained through a combination of interrelated explanantia. We have this emergent meta-indexical ego perspective I talked about with the help of brilliant philosophers such as Jenan Ismail. here I talked about these different, remember my qualifiers, subjective and objective, as well as this immunity to error from misidentification. Then I talked about meta-representing. Remember, putting real time in quotes for future understanding, as we do in popular, in reading popular science texts. And finally, in the third part, I moved to the concept of time and to its realization, externalization in different languages, in order to shed more light on this, so to speak, dynamic time, which we saw as clashing with static time. And I argued here that this is reanalyzable into static conceptual building blocks pertaining to degrees of epistemic commitment. I admit I cut that short because this is a longer, an older story. So if you have any questions, then do ask. That's all. My talk is going to be on my academia site from tomorrow. There are references to the entire article, so you are welcome to have a look at that. Other than that, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Kasia, for your very interesting talk. Now is the time for question and answer. I repeat the main rules. Please, who wants to make a question? Please write to me privately in the chat. So to Lorenzo Boccafogli, just write question or Q. And this way I will have an order, chronological order to make the questions. It's 10:23. We have about 40 minutes question and answers. And then we will begin with the talk of Professor Rovelli. Thank you very much, Kasia, also for accepting the change of the slot. It was a great help for us. Thank you very much. And then, yeah, write me simply Q, and then we'll go on chronological with the question you're proposing to me. Proposing to Kasia, actually, not to me. In the case Kasia can't hear good, can you hear me good right now?
It's still, I can hear less than a half. So if
less than a half is a problem.
It's really breaking up every other sentence. So you can try, but if I don't hear, then you have to write it. I'm sorry, but
yes, I understand.
Connections work. I don't know why this one doesn't.
Okay, we will do this way. I will give the word to the present people for the question. If you don't hear the question, please write down the question so Kasia can read it. Write down it in the public chat so Kasia can read it and answer vocally. Okay, that would, I think, the best solution to the connection problem that we have. Okay. The first one is from Professor Tim Williamson. To you the word, Professor Williamson. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, and thanks, Kasia, for that interesting talk. I want to ask about something that came in at the beginning and at the end, which was immunity to error through misidentification. I'm wondering how useful it is for you, because I mean, you gave the example of I have a headache as something that might be immune to error through misidentification, but it's perfectly possible to make that judgment, and as a result of an error of misidentification.
Stop hearing at this point, sorry. Yeah. I can guess what you're going to say, but I don't hear anymore.
Yes, so can you hear me now?
I don't hear. Please type it.
Oh, it'll take a long time, but I can.
We had this problem, connection problem with Kasia. If it would be possible for you, Professor Williamson, to write down a little bit your question, maybe yes, in a synthetic way, is maybe the only way we have to communicate now. She can read, Kasia can read it and then answer vocally, of course.
I'm quite a slow typist. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. So I am immune to. Sorry, I have a headache.
No, I don't hear. Please type.
Okay.
Please type. And can I just say, other people, if you have questions, start typing or something. So yes. It was, but it's really breaking up.
Lorenzo, if someone else has a really short question, it would be better for them to ask it straight.
Okay, so let's go on with your question. When you're ready, please, Mr. Williamson, tell me directly, and then you will have the word another time. Okay.
Yeah.
So you have the time to type the question.
Yeah.
The second question we have is from Professor Carlo Rovelli. Carlo Rovelli, you have the word. Please write down your question because Kasia has some problems in connecting with the audio.
I was writing down, so it will take me a minute. Kasia, are you hearing me or not at all?
I can, but in a couple of seconds I won't. So there's no point starting a discussion. I think just type, please. I'm sorry about that. I don't know why the connection.
Okay. So Lorenzo, please go ahead because it will take a moment for me to write it down. Go ahead and then whenever you want.
I hear you perfectly, but Kasia doesn't. So please write.
Yeah, I send you the mail, the chat message to you, and when you see it, you can read it.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Then let's see who has a short question. I have in the order Edna Miranda. Edna Miranda wrote down, type this question. I can copy this and put it in the common chat. Or please, Edna, put it publicly in the public chat for everybody. Etnan, you hear me? Yes. Yes. So make please the question in the public chat so Kasia can read it.
Yes, can we connect it with the concept of Lebenswelt in Husserl's phenomenology? What do you mean it? If it's time E, then certainly yes. Yes, we can. It's yes. I mean, it's the role of ego is it's commonsensical. You simply you can think of human time in Husserl's way of internal time consciousness. You can think of it in like in McTaggart, that we have experiences, we have memories of experiences, and we have anticipations. You can think of here, of course, about human time in terms of Heidegger and his Sein und Zeit, and why is time final for us, why it flows and begins and ends. So yes, the answer is yes. As I said, I'm influenced by sort of behind the scenes. I'm influenced by Husserl in many ways. Even when you go to my default semantics, then when I look for those conceptual building blocks, which I realized in languages, I don't look at the sentence, but look at the main speech act. So sometimes I will take the proposition of the sentence as it is. Sometimes we may have to extend it. So I say, I haven't eaten. Of course, it'd be, I haven't eaten breakfast today, not I haven't eaten ever. At other times I will go on the level of sigma to something else altogether. So I'm sort of digressing a bit just to say something else about Husserl now. Where by haven't eaten, I may mean, please, let's go to a restaurant. So on this level, I use Husserl in yet another way because I use strength of intentionality. Of underlying mental states, that sometimes we know about how to interpret the sentence because a sentence will have several readings and one of them will come with the strongest intentionality. So yes, but there are many influences from Husserl in my work, which yeah, wasn't easy when I was doing my DPhil, but not many people in the UK then talked about Husserl. And just to give you, it was long time ago. And what saved me is Michael Dummett then wrote a book on Husserl and other philosophers. So people read that book. So people started believing, then even a PhD student, that maybe there's something in it. Okay, so Tim Williamson, I have a headache, is not immune. I can judge it on the basis of misidentifying someone in the mirror as me, who might take a headache. What makes judgment is just, it is not based on identity premise. Yes, it's absolutely fine. I have to share my screen here. So when I talked about it, was somewhere around here.
Excuse me, Kasia, if I interrupt. I just wanted to read the question of Professor Williamson completely.
I don't hear you.
Okay. So,
what happened?
One moment. I write down the question. I will read the question, sorry. I'll read the question of Professor Williamson.
Oh, no, I read it.
Okay, but maybe some people didn't understand it right. Just a second. I have a headache is not IEM. I can judge it on the basis of misidentifying someone in the mirror as me, whom I take to have a headache expression on their face. What makes the judgment IEM is just that it is not based on an identity premise, contrary to Shoemaker. The same goes for temporal judgments. Even judgments involving non-indexical terms can be IEM if not based on an identity premise. So please.
Yeah, I was trying to share the screen, but for some reason it won't go up or down. I don't know why it doesn't let me share. Anyway, I absolutely agree. That's why I appealed there to Recanati's distinction about externally this and inherently internally this beliefs. So that will distinguish between these two situations, whether you are thinking externally of yourself as self, or you have this belief. So that's his inherently and externally. I don't think you object to that. Then it will be just simply drawing the boundary rather than by what linguistically you call a scenario, or through something else like different cases or different sort of sources of this belief about the self. This internal, external may not be the easiest terminology, but this is what it is. If you're thinking about yourself or not thinking about yourself, just experiencing. Does that provide an answer?
I don't think so. It's not how you're thinking of yourself. It's what the epistemic basis of the judgment is.
I don't hear you, which is horrible at the philosophy conference not to hear the question, but I think all I can say that I'm aware that not everybody agrees that there are beliefs that are immune to misidentification, but even if you take that perspective, it doesn't matter, because what matters for my argument is actually this lack of immunity. Because remember, what I used is this lack of immunity where I can believe that my driving test hasn't happened. And this is what I used for my operators of objective and subjective. But as to inherently beliefs which are immune to identification, I had a chat with a typologist, which was really revealing, linguistic typologist, who says that this is actually some languages. There are some languages which make overtly the distinction between beliefs which are me, as if looking at myself from the inside, whereas beliefs that are me but looking at myself from the inside. So there is something in it. Let me just read your question again. It's not how you think of the referent in the belief, it's where the belief comes from. Yeah, okay, so that's exactly, we agree on that.
Are you satisfied? So I will read, it's okay?
Yes, let's go to Professor Rovelli's question.
So what's happening, Lorenzo? Do you want to read it, or shall I read the question?
Yes,
or just?
Yes, I read it. From Carlo Rovelli.
Interesting talk. Apologies for joining late.
Super interesting talk. Apologize for joining late and missing the beginning. A lot to learn for me. I appreciated especially your articulated relation between beliefs and concepts, and your talk on semi-propositional beliefs, which I think may clarify much confusion about misunderstanding between physics and popularization. As a physicist who is sometimes quoted saying the time does not exist, I would like to say that I think that time flows for me, and also flows in nature. The naive static block universe picture is a misunderstanding. There is nothing static in nature. The point is only the complexity of the notion of time. Both in your thinking and the concept needed to make sense of nature. A lot to learn for me, so it was the correction. So she has some comment about what Carlo Rovelli says.
Can I answer now? Okay, Carlo, if I may, thank you very much. Yes, I'm not a physicist, although there was a time in my distant past when I really wanted to be. But I understand that this is precisely the case, that you can have different pictures of reality depending on where you stand, and nothing is static. So, and you also have now people, what also puzzles me, that philosophers are often, philosophers of time divide themselves into A theorists and B theorists. So either time flows or time doesn't flow, but nobody really looks at McTaggart's C series, according to which there is no arrow. So you basically have events, but no arrow. That seems to me interesting, because then you leave it to physicists from which direction you look at the universe. What does it mean that we can exist only with some universes, not in others, depending on entropy? What would it mean for entropy to go the other way? And all these fascinating things. There's nothing static about it. This is as much as I say, because I learned a lot about these things from your book. I learned a lot from your talk in Cambridge as well. I was there. And yeah, I'm glad that you find this as a bit of a bridge, because that was the intention, a bridge between what physicists tell us, a bridge, philosophers, and then on the other hand, what philosophers tell us and what linguists actually see in how we speak about time, and how we speak is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
Professor Rovelli, are you satisfied with the answer?
Yes.
Perfect. So just a moment, I had in my order a question from Professor Graham Priest, but we need actually the typed version. I don't know if he has it, or should we go on with Santiago Núñez Corrales?
No, I have it. Let me just paste it into the chat column.
Okay, so may we say that The way languages seem to encode time, facilitate reenacting the past to simulating the future by compressing it across syntactic and semantic dimensions.
So from Santiago Nunes Corrales, may we say that the way languages seem to encode time, facilitate reenacting the past, or simulating the future by compressing it across syntactic and semantic dimensions, given that our brains possess the facility of simulation to a great extent, being therefore a sort of powers and heuristics to cope with the conflict of the world.
This is, can I answer now? Okay, so this is, yeah, Santiago. Yeah, hello, can I see you first of all? It's like to, it's good to be able to see the person you reply to, but, oh, okay, hello. It's a very complex question because, well, first of all, simulation theory, I always find it a little bit fishy, but there is something in it. But what I would like to say that simulation has to rely on what meaning is for humans. And what we know about meaning is that there isn't any meaning that is represented somewhere in us, whether we are Denetian or not. There is no meaning sitting in us. We have memories of how language was used in the past, but these memories don't lead to abstraction. This seems to be a more and more widely shared view, which I subscribe to, that you don't have an abstraction of meaning. This abstraction from past uses comes together with what Recanati again calls modulation, or some modification. So basically, this is where he ends up with this late Wittgensteinian picture of meaning, that what we have is uses which are informed by past uses, but no core. So whatever language then gives us, syntactic and semantic dimensions will have to be include the pragmatic dimension, include the fact that it's all dynamic. We don't recreate anything. Semantics, syntax, pragmatics have to be dynamic. We go to a certain point, and at that point where we are, everything we've experienced so far gets not only summed up and gives us an abstraction, but it gets changed and changed and changed. Does it answer the question? I just sort of, do I waffle? But that's how I see it.
Thank you so much. Yes, it provides perspective into what I'm trying to get at.
Okay, Kasia, you can go on with a question from Professor Priest. I write to you right now. I hope you read the next one.
I'm having trouble even seeing things now. Let me just move.
Can you see the question of Professor Priest? I've written to you this.
I'm trying to see other questions. It's sort of Santiago, you can see. maybe say that, okay. Maybe say that the way languages, no, that I've answered.
Do you see my ones?
I see Graham. I can't
Yes.
say that I followed all the details. To get clearer, let me ask a simple question. I sit in my chair in New York. I just sit here. Phenomenologically, there appears to be no change of place, but there appears to be a change of time. What explains the difference? Okay, so I hope there isn't any difference. I hope that the way I see it, right, we know that you sit in your chair, space doesn't move. You sit, when you're on a cruise, you sit in your chair, and then the bank of the river or whatever, the space moves. It's much easier to think of space as not moving, and it's much more difficult to think of time as not moving. But is it a quantitative difference or is it a qualitative difference? Or is it just, if it's qualitative, is it just this Heideggerian difference that it's because our time is limited, we are born and we die and we know about it? What if if our science progresses and we know more about what we turn into, we will have a different perspective? I don't know, but I have this from the way I look at it. It seems to me that a lot of it will be quantitative, that you can see space moving, and sometimes you wonder, am I moving, is space moving, or is it just or am I just dizzy, and so on. So it's not that very much different. And you look at metaphors. When you look at metaphors, we conceptualize time in terms of space quite often. Christmas is coming, we are approaching the summer and so on. But there are also opposite conceptualizations. And when you look at other species, when you look at, can't remember which one they were, I think vervet monkeys, that conceptualize space in terms of time, because when there is a predator coming, then they will allegedly think, how long will it take me to hide behind that bush from a predator? So they estimate distance in terms of space. So it's really, there is a lot of, there are partial sort of argumentation reasons to think of them as quantitative differences. Now, Professor Priest, okay.
I hope Professor Priest, I don't know if Professor Priest is satisfied with the answer.
I don't feel as though the question was really addressed, but under these conditions, it's rather difficult to carry on a philosophical conversation. So let's go on.
You're right, it's quite difficult. It's quite difficult. Okay. Since we have no other question, it's 10 minutes before 11. So I would like to thank very much another time Katarzyna Jaszczuk.
Sorry, I can see that question. I can just about answer the last question. I can't say that I followed. Oh no, it was the last question. Okay.
Yeah, it was the last one. It was the last one.
I apologize for the connection. It couldn't happen. I mean, philosophy conference is one kind of conference. You have to talk, and unfortunately, it's complicated.
We did what we could, and fortunately, we could hear you. But would be so worst if you couldn't. So then thank you very much for your exposition. Thank you very much for your talk. It was deeply interesting. Now we can have a little pause of about of about 10 minutes is 10:51. At 11 o'clock, we will begin with our second guest, with our second exposition, our second talk, and from Professor Carlo Rovelli. So, see you in 10 minutes. We have 10 minutes time to relax, to drink a cup of coffee, what you want, and then we will meet here again. I'll write immediately this to our guest, Katarzyna Jasiuk. So thank everybody for your presence, and yeah, in 8 minutes we will begin with the next talk after the little pause. So, good morning, everybody. I hope you hear me well. Now it's time for our second talk of today and the second in our Congress. Everybody knows Carlo Rovelli is a theoretical physicist, historian of physics, and philosopher of science. Along with Liz Molling, Abe Ashtekar, and Ted Jacobson, he is one of the founders of the theory called loop quantum gravity. He's a member of the French University Institute and of the International Academy of Philosophy of Science, as well as being responsible for the quantum gravity team at the Center for Theoretical Physics at the University of Aix-Marseille. Prior to his current academic position at Aix-Marseille, Rovelli held postdoctoral position at the University of Rome, at the International School for Advanced Studies in Trieste, and at Yale University. From 1990 to 2000, he taught at the University of Pittsburgh. In the context or in the frame of our Congress, it's also important to remember, because we have the intention to bridge sciences, natural sciences, formal science, and social science with philosophy, that the figure of Carlo Rovelli as an intellectual conveys also symbolic values, because he's actually a scientist of great influence who actively pursues philosophy and believes firmly in the interdisciplinary continuity of philosophy and science. Last but not least, Carlo Rovelli is known for his constant social commitment in an emancipatory, egalitarian sense, in particular by fully supporting enterprises and initiatives of the younger generation. It is in this sense that his latest best-selling essay, Helgoland, whose success in Italy is enormous, should be read. Carlo Rovelli's inspiring relational quantum mechanics serves several aims at once. It provides a new vision of what the world of quantum mechanics is like, and it offers a program to derive the theory's formalism from a set of simple postulates pertaining to information processing. It is a fascinating work, in part because of Rovelli's reliance on the information theory approach to the foundation of quantum mechanics, and in part because its presentation involves taking sides on a fundamental divide within philosophy itself. These are the words of the great philosopher of science, philosopher of physics, Bas van Fraassen in 2010, 2 years after what we can call a structural turn, with the publication of Scientific Representation, Paradoxes, and Perspectives. Now I'll give the word, without boring you further, to Professor Carlo Rovelli. Thank you very much, Carlo, for being with us, and thank you very much for accepting, changing the slot with Kasia Yashet, because we had problem of connection and maybe misunderstanding. I repeat this for everybody connecting right now. We had to change the first and the second talk, the first with the second. So, Carlo, to you the word, and thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Lorenzo, for this very kind introduction, and thank you for all of you for being here. It's a pleasure and an honor. I am particularly attached to Costa Rica for a number of reasons. My best friend probably was there for a long time, and I visited several times, have dear friends there. I think it's a fantastic country for a number of reasons. I wish I was there in person. I am also happy to be in this conference where, as Lorenzo said, the interplay between philosophy and science, it's looked at, an interplay which I think is vital, needed for both disciplines, without which both disciplines, I think, risk to lose and become more sterile. The work of my life have been in quantum gravity, trying to figure out quantum gravity. And for figuring out in quantum gravity, there are two major conceptual issues to address. One is time, and we just heard from Kasia, and this is a theme which is very, has always been very dear to my work, my intellectual work. I have found extremely interesting the conference of Kasia this morning. It's extremely illuminating for me. And the second is quantum mechanics, and I'm going to talk about quantum mechanics. This is a topic of my presentation. Again, the reason I've been interested in quantum mechanics is because to do quantum gravity, we need as much clarity as possible on time, space-time, and also on quantum mechanics. And this is why the reflection of quantum mechanics has followed me all my life. My last book, Helgoland, is about quantum mechanics, and it presents, and this is what also I'm going to do here, the view I have about quantum mechanics, which and the view I find more interesting about quantum mechanics, which is a relational view about quantum mechanics. Let me share my slides here. Sorry, just 1 second. Yeah, here it is. And share screen, advance the portion of screen, share. Just kill this one, which is not the right one, and put it in center. Is that okay? Do you see it right? Can you just, Lorenzo, can you just give me a sign that the voice is fine and the... Is that all fine? Are you okay? Good. So this is the title of my talk, and that's what I'm going to talk about: trying to make sense of quantum physics, what we have learned about the world, about quantum physics, and in particular focus on the relational interpretation. And what I'm going to do is first try to frame very rapidly the problem of quantum mechanics. I'm sure that in the audience, there are people who know this well, but let me try to present it in one way, because as usual, one of the problems in addressing a problem is finding what exactly the problem is, formulating it. So I'll try to give my take on it and say why, in this context, the relation between science and philosophy plays a role. And then I will go to relational quantum mechanics. I'll try to explain what it is and why it might represent one way of addressing the interpretation of quantum mechanics. And I will zoom in on some historical consideration about it, and I will close, which is sort of the tentative main message of the talk, which is to forget the wave function, not think about the world in terms of a wave function. But let me start from the beginning, super rapidly. Quantum physics is, I would say, fantastically successful. It's probably the best scientific theory we have ever, because it has never been wrong. It has predicted spectacular things. And more than that, we have no indication of its limits. We have other super good theories in physics, but we think we know where they are supposed to go wrong. Quantum mechanics, we don't know where it goes wrong. Maybe it will, but for the moment, we have no indication that it should break down somewhere. It has given spectacular applications, results, predictions. It has allowed us to understand the basic of chemistry, how the sun works, and so on and so forth. Okay, so far so good. But it's truly incomprehensible if you think it's carefully. And the way it's presented in the books, usually, it generally makes no sense at all. The way it's presented in the book is that the theory is about what we see when we look, and not about what happens there. So the theory is formulated in terms of physical systems, quantum systems, which could be the sun, could be a molecule, could be an atom, could be a radioactive nucleus, could be a chip in the computer, a little transistor in solid state physics in the computer, or formulation of a galaxy in the star. They're all systems which are treated quantum mechanically. So there's a system, and here I draw the system in just the symbol of an atom, which is a typical quantum system. And the theory doesn't tell us what happened in the atom at all, but it tells what happens when the atom interacts with us. So it's like, it is formulated as if nature cared whether we're looking or not. But we don't believe that nature cares whether we're looking or not. In fact, I don't believe so. I think that I'm a piece of nature like any other, and that a description of nature, of course, might take into account, which I'm giving it sort of from the inside, for being a piece of nature, but not that I'm special in physical terms in some sense. That's a problem. In a couple of slides, I will zoom it in a little bit more clear distinction. But I want to immediately say what are the direction of thinking which are common in physics nowadays about this problem, which I've grouped into 6 main directions. Each one sort of is declined in different manners, and there are others. I don't want to say these are all there is, but these are by far the directions which are more discussed. And the relational one, which is the third, which I want to discuss, is it's emphasized in blue. Among practicing physicists, the Copenhagen view is it's usual. It works very well, and it's the idea that a quantum system, here's a quantum system, take a value, become real, so to say. Their properties become the real, where they interact with the measuring apparatus, with obvious sort of an obvious sense of incompleteness in this story. Stronger in that direction, it's quite popular in recent years. A stronger version of this, where the theory is just about what an agent, here it's a man looking, can say about the world. So it's only about things being realized when they interact with the agent. So it's all about the agent knowledge, not about the world itself. I'll skip relational quantum mechanics for a moment and jump to the other sort of 3 ways of making sense of quantum theory, which is that the theory really describes a wave function or a quantum state, which is all there is to say about the quantum system, independently of any observer or any measuring apparatus. And this comes in 3 varieties, I would say. The many-world interpretation, which philosophers at Oxford love, and some cosmologists and theoretical physicists love, in which there's also only the wave function. And out of that, you should come out the observations, and out of that we should extract the strange observations related to an observer that the theory predicts. An alternative is to imagine this wave function, but also some real facts of the world, where the particle is, what is happening at some point. Both these views, the many world and the hidden variables, add a lot of sort of ontology, if I may, to the picture of the world, which is simple quantum mechanics. Many worlds requires us to think that there are many copies of ourselves that are seeing different things, and hidden variables, as the name indicates, assume that there are some physical variables which are hidden in principle, which are inaccessible to us. By adding all that, one constructs in some sense classical, in some sense closer to our previous classical intuition understanding of the world as a substance that evolved in some way. And the third possibility is that there is the wave function, but there is some phenomenon not yet discovered. So this is the only view of quantum mechanics that requires to think that quantum mechanics is actually wrong. And it has to be, there's something we haven't discovered again. There is some actual physics that constantly changes the wave function by making the wave function collapse, namely making it being specific independently of an apparatus or a man. Let me make this all a little bit more concrete. This is a prototypical quantum experiment. We have an atom of uranium or whatever, which is radioactive. We have some detectors around, Geiger detectors, and the atom is radioactive. At some point, one detector clicks. Bing, radiation has been detected. Now, the way we describe this in quantum mechanics is by thinking that there is a wave function, a wave inside the atom, which moves out, leaks out continuously and goes everywhere in space, right? That's what we do in our paper. That's what we are told to do at school. And at some point, these waves interact with the counters, but only one of them, and never more than one of them, reacts, and boom, the wave now it's concentrated on that particular detector. So it's like when there's a detection, something happens. But of course, the question is what is a detection? When is it that this happened? And you probably know a famous way of making this very visible, which is due to Schrödinger, who imagined a cat, the famous Schrödinger cat, would interact with the quantum system, and in the moment of the interaction, something happens. The quantum system gets a determinate value, because this is what I'll talk to do in quantum physics. But if I consider the cat itself a quantum system and interact with it later, then I have to think that the cat, it's really like the previous example, the wave function spread all over, is spread over two different positions, the cat that has detected one thing and the cat has detected the other thing. And if you think that the cat is a person, the usual language in philosophy is to call the outside one Wigner and the cat a Wigner friend, because of a famous article of Wigner about this situation. Then the Wigner friend sees something, because we all see something, but is also in a superposition of different configuration, having seen something and seeing the opposite. And that's, in the many world picture, for instance, you think that they're both real. So every time we see something, there is a copy of ourselves seeing something else. So these are the various ways in which, I'm back to these slides, this is resolved. But I think that something becomes real when you interact with an apparatus, a microscopic apparatus, with an agent, or by trying to make a complicated story, adding reality. I mean, nothing really happens, a multiplication of observer configuration, and so on and so forth. Now, one may say, and this is a comment about philosophy of science, one may say, look, first of all the first 5 of these ways of viewing quantum mechanics actually never give different predictions. The last one does, but let me forget the last one, because they're experiment trying to check it. And for the moment, they will give a negative result. If they will give positive results, quantum mechanics needs to be corrected, we will think about it. But for the moment, quantum mechanics is the best description of the world. So let me look at the first 5. They're very different philosophically, extremely different philosophically, because I'm not going too much in this slide, but they incline toward different philosophies: pragmatism, empiricism, even idealism, certain instrumentalism on the one hand, and a strong commitment to a strong version of realism, even deterministic realism in many world and hidden variables. Each one of this is coherent. It's not that they're wrong; they're all consistent, but they have a sort of a philosophical cost, so to say. Copenhagen requires us to not pose the question why the apparatus is not quantum mechanical. Cubism assumes a sort of agent as needed to make think of nature. The many world interpretation, as I said, has hugely inflated the ontology, in which there are copies of ourselves that see different things, and so on and so forth. So one may react as not in this audience, but among many of my colleagues, saying that's philosophy is not of interest for physics, right? And my typical answer to that is that this reaction, it's not new in the history of science. Many examples, the most famous examples of all, I'm sure you know about it, in this when Copernicus published his major book, De Revolutionibus, which sort of jump-started the modern scientific revolution and the Renaissance. The preface written by Osiander made the point very strongly that to ask whether the sun is the center of the universe or the earth is the center of the universe is just philosophy of not interest for science, right? I'm not going to read it, but the preface, which was not written by Copernicus, of course, that was definitely not the view of Copernicus, says that the different hypotheses need not to be true or even probable. The Earth going around of the sun needs not to be true, not even probable. And if you think carefully, is that an empirical question that the Earth moves? It's not an empirical question, right? There's no way whatsoever to measure if the Earth is the center of the universe or is not the center of the universe. It's not an empirical question. I mean, if you want to think that the Earth is the center of the universe, there's no observation that contradicts us. So what's the point? The point is that by rethinking conceptually what it means to move, by allowing this Earth to move, by reorganizing the conceptual structure in which you don't separate Earth and the other heavenly body, but you separate stars and planets and satellites, you have a different conceptualization, which work fantastically better for understanding the world. So much so that it allows Huygens, Kepler, Newton, Galileo, and so on and so forth. So I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that science is definitely not just about, having equations that spit up numbers that we compare with what we measure. That's not science. That's a tool for science. Science is not just about strict verificationalism or falsificationalism as a la Popper. Science is about devising a conceptual structure which is useful for understanding the world. And there are clear moments in which this is confused, like just after Copernicus, or just after Maxwell, when people were conceptually confused about how to think about this Maxwell novelty, Faraday-Maxwell novelty, which are the fields. I mean, do we have to think of some effective description of some particle, ether moving there, or do we have to think about taking them as just our best description of what is real, so on and so forth? These are not non-scientific questions. These are questions at the core of science that don't have a strict empirical answer. You cannot verify or falsify an answer to this question directly, but they're deeply scientific because they regard the best way for conceptualizing nature. So the distinction between the different perspective is not non-scientific, as is often put, but it's at the core of science. And then the argument is not what is wrong. The argument is what is the best effective way of describing the world. Let me jump ahead to this slide here. Richard Feynman, who is a great scientist and with a remarkable intellectual clarity, said that one of the amazing aspects of nature is a variety of interpretation schemes it admits. So what to do with the rest? So to discuss about underdetermination of the theories or things like that? No, he says every theoretical physicist who's any good knows 6 or 7 different theoretical representations of exactly the same physics. So is that being relativist deeply? No. Why? He must keep the scientist is any good, must keep there in his head or her head, because one of them may turn out to be the fruitful one. So one of them is better, is definitely better. And my job is to do quantum gravity. I have to keep all this interpretation in mind, but try to see which one is better for understanding nature, better for going ahead in the interpretation, in understanding of nature. So let me get to the how much time I've used. Good, plenty of time. Let me get to relational quantum mechanics, which is the blue one here, which I've not discussed, and which I'm going to illustrate. Oops, sorry. Which I'm going to illustrate. I want to start from to introduce the main idea of relational quantum mechanics by discussing. I work like a philosopher here, by discussing a phrase by a sentence written by Niels Bohr, which is one of the deepest thinkers of quantum mechanics. So Niels Bohr writes, and I want to discuss this because I think a careful discussion of it clarifies enormously. Niels Bohr writes, in classical physics, the interaction between an object and the measuring apparatus can be overlooked. In quantum physics, the interaction is an inseparable part of the phenomenon. Therefore, the unambiguous description of quantum phenomena is required in principle to include a description of all the relevant aspects of the experimental arrangement. Now, this is the core of quantum physics, but is also deeply misleading because 100 years have passed since Niels Bohr. When he was writing these things, most of the quantum science was in a laboratory with apparata. Now we know that quantum physics is good for the stars, the galaxies, everywhere, and it's actually the foundation of our current physics. So we have to say the same, to understand the same thing without reference to apparatuses and without reference to experimental arrangement. And here is the way to do so. We just have to rewrite his sentence in a less anthropocentric manner. And this is my rewriting of Niels Bohr's phrase. In classical physics, the properties of any object are determined irrespectively from the interaction between these objects and others, not necessarily apparatus, whatever is interacting with. So quantum physics, what it is the discovery that interactions with apparatuses or any other object are an inseparable aspect of the properties of an object. The phenomena, it's what phenomena are about. So therefore, the unambiguous description of any object requires the inclusion of all the objects involved in the interaction in which the object manifests itself. So the idea is to forget observation, forget humans, apparata, macroscopic, anything like that, and just focus on interaction, and forget the actual measurement and think about relations established when things interact. So this is the core of the relational idea, two ideas, two key ideas, and then some technical things which, given the audience, I don't want to go too much into it. But the central idea is the following. Physical systems have properties, but the properties don't describe the system as they are by themselves. What the property of a system is a description of what happens in their interactions. Properties exist at interactions. So therefore, the properties have values at interaction, not necessarily before, independently from the interaction. There is no meaning of giving a property to us, attributing a property to a system outside interaction, because the property is a description of what happened in interaction. And second, crucially, this is where relational interpretation takes its names, the properties are relative to the interacting systems. So we shouldn't say the particle has got to that point. We should say with respect to that detector or set of detectors, the particles go to that point. We shouldn't say the quantum system has affected the cat. We should say with respect to the cat, the quantum system has a property, but not necessarily for the person outside. So a property with respect to a friend is not necessarily a property with respect to Wigner outside the box. And technically, this step here is the key one. The probability, quantum mechanics give probability. Probability is that A happened given B. But we have to interpret these probabilities, which the formalism, the mathematical formalist gives, only when A and B refer to the same interacting systems. And the probability computed as property with respect to a system S prime given property with respect to a system S different from S prime have no meaning in general. Okay, this is not, we should not read the formalism as saying that this is significative. The transitional amplitude is significative only as interpreted as a property with respect to a given system. So in the Schrödinger cat, the atom has a certain property with respect to the cat, but this does not imply or should not be used to compute interactions between the cat on the atom and some external physical systems, because a property relative to the cat has no bearing with a property with respect to a physical system. So it's not that the cat is in superposition or anything like that. Is that properties are real, concrete, part of the ontology of the world, realize that interactions and their probabilistic relations don't jump from one observer to the other. In a sense, the fact that the property of the atom, say the spin of the atom was up or whatever, is relatively to the cat. And this way of putting things, fact are relative to physical systems, has got even to the experimental world. Here is an article that says experimental rejection of observer independence in the quantum world. So facts are relative, facts are deeply relative, in the sense that I said properties describe interactions and they're relative to the interacting systems. So this is the sort of summary or total complete exposition of the relational interpretation of quantum mechanics. First is the notion of system, namely the world can be decomposed, in fact, in many alternatives ways. That's the beauty of the story. I mean, that it works whatever the composition of the world we make. We take the world, we break it in pieces, the sun, the earth, the moon, me, you, the cat, the atom, another atom, a molecule, another molecule. We can break it into systems in arbitrary ways. And this system interact, okay? The point is about the interaction with this system. What we describe is interaction with this system. Now, each system can be characterized by a set of variables. So mathematically is an algebra of variables, A1, AN, but these do not represent how the system is. They represent what the system does to another system in the moment of the interactions. So it's something that pertains to the interaction. Outside this context, the properties are not determinate. We may assign a system a property, meaning that we expect that when it will interact, this property will show up. And in the classical domain, this can be done forgetting about detail and relationalism because quantum phenomena are washed out. But by themselves, properties only refer to interactions. These variables, therefore, take value only at interaction, and the value are relative to the interacting system. In addition, precisely because the variables form an algebra, what the theory predict is that they can only take certain values, discreteness of quantum mechanics. So the algebra, the value of a system determines a set of values that some property can have. The energy can have only these values. This is what the theory predict. The angular momentum can have only these values. So the formulas of quantum mechanics give the probabilities given certain values of some system relative to a system to compute the probability amplitude, the probabilities of other values of other variables of the same system relative to the same system. And finally, it can be shown, and it can be shown technically, that because of the coherence, because of the fact that when you have many degrees of freedom, you don't see interference anymore. Quantum interference gets washed out somehow. You don't see quantum phenomena anymore. This labeling of properties by systems, by the system that are in the interaction, participate in the interaction where they come out, becomes irrelevant. So this can be shown technically that once you go to many degrees of freedom, having to remember which quantity is relatively to what becomes irrelevant because quantum properties are not there anymore. A few comments before moving toward the end. This was the core presentation of relational quantum mechanics. And because and before some sort of a historical and general comment that I will close by. First of all, I've never mentioned the wave function. And so what is a wave function? What is this wave that goes around? Do we have to think that in the world, in the actual world, there is this waving, and then make up a complicated story of connecting this waving with the fact that what we see is one and only one detector to interact? I think that the answer is a resounding no. Namely, the wave function is to be interpreted epistemically, in the relational interpretation. It's a wonderful tool. but it's a tool for calculation. And in fact, the classical limit of the wave function is the Hamilton-Jacobi function, for those of you who know classical mechanics, which nobody would ever dream of interpreting realistically. The Hamilton-Jacobi function is a tool for calculation. It's not that there is some, it's like the weather forecast or the prediction of the horses races. So it's a tool for saying what we may expect on the basis of current knowledge, what is happening in the future. Is a way of coding past observations, not something which is out there. First point. Second point, there are no special observers. Consciousness, human beings, macroscopic system, apparata play no special roles. Agents, I think, in interpreting nature. Not because they're not special. We are special, and there is a huge amount of scientific and philosophical work trying to understand us, ourselves. Super interesting, but that's not what physics is about. What physics is about understanding what happened in nature when we're not there. And for that, we don't need the notion of agent or subject of knowledge. We should be careful. We should sort of detect in our formalism what depends on the fact that there's an observer, but not pretend that nature knows whether there's an observer or not when things happen. Now, the problem of quantum mechanics has often been presented as a tension between the unitary evolution and wave function collapse. And in relational quantum mechanics, this is resolved by essentially not interpreting the wave function realistically, so interpreting the wave function epistemically. So what the theory is about is values of quantities, and the unitary evolution is our calculation of the probability distribution at some time, given some information at some other time, provided that the system is isolated. So unitary evolution is a description of what to expect when the system is isolated. But of course, it's not going to work when something is actually realized in nature and the variables take value. So it's since this is relative, relative to one observer, the evolution is unitary. Relative to the other observer, there's a collapse. Remember, relative to the cat, the Schrödinger wave function of the atom collapses. Relatively to the external observer, it doesn't. But not because there is a strange tension to resolve, because these are two different systems. We're talking about two different sets of quantities. Now, today, in some places, quantum mechanics is introducing the Schrödinger wave function. But that's, I think, very misleading. And that's the source of the confusion. Quantum mechanics was not born by Schrödinger in 26 with the wave function. It was born by Heisenberg, Born, Dirac, Jordan the year before, in 25. Full quantum mechanics existed before the wave function, before the quantum state. And in that formulation, which I find extremely more clear, quantum mechanics is about systems, about variables. It has the same equations as classical theory plus one, which is xp minus px is IH bar. So the only discovery, sort of, the atomic bomb, the lasers, the foundation of the Mendeleev table, quantum teleportations, quantum computers, they're all a consequence of the single equation xp minus px equal IH bar, which says that variables don't commute and therefore have a spectrum, therefore is discrete, therefore we can compute probability amplitudes, therefore, okay? So the formula of quantum mechanics is like classical mechanics, plus understanding that at small scale, because h bar is small, classical variables don't commute, and we know how they don't commute, okay? No state, no evolution, no evolving wave function, no continuity. This is all about discreteness. As Max Born had clear in 1925, quantum mechanics is about a sort of a flash ontology of discrete events in the world, not about continuity. And the confusion is taking the wave function too seriously. And that's the origin of the confusion. And so the culpable is Schrödinger, if you want. But Schrödinger himself, one of the deepest thinkers of quantum mechanics, completely gave up the idea of continuity. This is a text by Schrödinger late. He says the inventors of wave mechanics himself indulged for some times in the full hope that they had paved the way to return to a classical continuous description. But again, the hope was deceptive. Nature herself seemed to reject continuous description. I skip this one and I read the last line here. It is better to regard a particle not as a permanent entity, but as its instantaneous event. This is Schrödinger, okay? Not as a evolving wave function, but as a sequence, they should have better say, of instantaneous event when the particle interact with something else. The counter argument is that, but come on, the wave function is so visible, so intuitive, it gives us a picture of what happened. This is true. And of course, we should use the wave function. But remember, it is a wave function describing different atoms, orbitals in chemistry. But what gives us a representation of things shouldn't be taken too seriously ontologically, otherwise we get confused. So this is a prototypical example. This is a fantastic representation of the caloric heat, okay? This is a picture of heat, but that doesn't mean that we should take heat as an entity by itself. We know that heat is just a motion of molecules, right? And the getting out of this realistic interpretation of what heat is what took out from the confusion about thermodynamics and statistical mechanics. And in the same spirit, stop thinking of the wave function directly with an ontological interpretation will help us. This is Bruno De Finete, who is talking about the similar things, abandoning the superficial credences about the reality of the caloric fluid, the cosmic ether, absolute space and time, or fairies and witches has been a step along the construction of scientific thinking. And I would add the wave function. And De Finete is talking about probabilities here, right? Of course, what you want to get rid of is probability. He's the main defender of the subjective interpretation of probability. And wave function is probabilities. It's just our expectation of what's going to happen next. And in fact, the wave function of a system depends on which other is relative to other system, depend what other system sort of knows about the system. Does this mean that giving an ontological, I go back to the general philosophical issue here. Does this mean that giving an ontological way to the wave function is wrong? Well, it's not wrong. It's just not useful. Is that not the scientifically convenient things to be doing? I don't think science is about finding out what's right or wrong, reading the mind of God, finding the truth with a T. Science is about devising the most productive conceptualization at our present level of knowledge for understanding the world. I mean, I think that, you know, Howard Stein was particularly clear on that. And the talk, because before mine had a similar point, concept must come after knowledge, not before knowledge. A priori analysis of concept is misleading when the concept is based on wrong knowledge. We should understand something. If we happen to understand something, we just discover the world as quantum aspects, we should readapt our concept to the world, not in a rigid way, but not in a way that you can read directly out of the the empirical information, because of what Feynman did. Nature can be looked at different ways, like human relations can be described in different ways. You can read Kafka and have 6 different versions of the same events, but some take us ahead and give us a wider idea. So views like many world and the hidden variables, pilot waves, they're not wrong, they're right, but they add concept. They forbid to take on board what seems to me the main message of quantum mechanics, which is that the old strongly realistic conceptualization of a continuous world is just not what nature prefers. So they add things to case nature into our old conceptual scheme instead of adapting our conceptual scheme to nature. I just want to have one slide on the informational formulation of relational quantum mechanics, also because Lorenzo mentioned it in the introduction. One way of presenting all that is to use a language of information. It's one possibility. I don't want to say that the language of information is needed to make sense of quantum mechanics, but it does simplify. The risk is that information is such a slippery term that everybody wants to read what they want. Here is information is a very crude, deflationary, minimal term. It's sort of correlation between systems. So it's Shannon relative information, the technical version of the notion of information used. But in terms of this, the entire form of quantum mechanics can essentially be derived with some technicalities added from two postulates. One is the amount of available relative information about a finite system is finite. And second is that in spite of one, it's always possible to gather new relative information about any system. And quantum mechanics come from that, because you see, the key here is that 1 and 2 are not in contradiction because of this relevant information. So the relative information is the one that determines the probability distribution of what happened next. And what is being said here is that because of 1, there is discreteness. It follows directly. So there's a finite number of alternatives. This should be technically qualified. I'm not going into technicalities here. In how a system can affect another one. So the discrete of quantum mechanics follows. But even if you have maximal available information about a system, there is always a possibility to get new ones with some of the relevant information becoming irrelevant. Some of the previous relative information becoming irrelevant. Right? You measure spin in one direction, then you measure spin in the other direction, the previous information becomes completely irrelevant. So from that, you derive uncertainty principle, pretty obviously. You derive the probabilities in quantum mechanics. And you see, this is about how systems interact. When two systems interact, the information that one system has about the other one, correlations, has these properties. And from that, the quantum mechanics come out. I don't want to go into that because it becomes very technical. Reconstruction theorems has been beautifully completed in a number of people. The most interesting version of me is the one quoted here. All right. So this is, I'm getting to the end because I look forward for a discussion and comments for all of you and your reactions. This is again a picture of the sixth version I had, where I've organized, I could organize this way, the sort of Bohr-like and the Einstein-like views, more inclined toward instrumentalism. And the problem was the problem of instrumentalism. I think it's scientific and philosophical. It doesn't tell us how to think about nature, and that's what we want from science. It only tells us about what we think. While Einstein insisted for a strong realism, these are all interpretations of strong realism, and but there's a compromise between the two. I mean, you can navigate between the radical between Scylla and Charybdis, between radical instrumentalism and a realism at the price of inflation ontology, and that's what relational quantum mechanics does. So if it takes quantum mechanics as it is, as a realist theory, but not about the wave function with all the comes, as a realist theory about interaction between systems, but it's a slightly sort of weakened realism, like, you know, velocity, position, as they define classical mechanics by Copernicus and Newton and Copernicus are weakened with respect to absolute position, absolute velocity in non-classical mechanics. So you give up some strong realism, accepting that physical variables are about relations, not about things, to navigate between stay away from radical instrumentalists, have the possibility of thinking what happened in nature without adding an excessive, useless ontological weight. So that's my take about quantum mechanics. This is the main message. If you want to make sense of quantum mechanics, stop thinking of the wave function as the thing we're talking about. Just think of it as a tool for calculation of what actually happened. But what actually happened is real, but it's relational. And I close with a slide, which I just leave here. This is my book in which this is discussed much more in details. And these are the main people of relational quantum mechanics. And this is a number of philosophers who have sort of framed quantum mechanics in the context of different philosophical programs, if you want, or views. Quantum mechanics, relational quantum mechanics is not a philosophical position. It can be read within different philosophical positions. I know, Van Frassen, constructive empiricism, structural realism, this is what Dorato and Cadotto do, even Kantian perspective, this is what Bitbull does. It's quantum mechanics is sort of, relational quantum mechanics is a philosophically informed, or try to be philosophically informed way of addressing an issue in the interpretation of current physics, which I think it's beautifully open, and it try to take us ahead. So I stop here. Thank you very much. I spoke 50 minutes, and I look forward. I do hear, unlike Casey before, so I look forward for your comment, criticism, and to learn.
Thank you very much, Professor Rovelli, for your excellent talk. Professor Lorenzo Boccafoli is having some trouble with his internet connection, so I will be in charge of the Q&A. I posted the rules in the chat, so same as before, if you want to ask a question to Professor Rovelli, please write me down a private message and I will give you the word in order. So the first one is Sebastian Gil, so I will now give the word to him. Sebastian, do you hear us?
Yes, sorry, I just had to move down turn on my microphone. Yeah, so Carlo, thank you so much for the talk. It was very illuminating. I got a lot out of that. So my question is kind of a procedural one, and it has two directions. So first of all, if we're interested in going beyond non-relativistic quantum mechanics and actually wanting to go into some of the open problems of quantum gravity, how does relational quantum mechanics help us? And in particular, I'm curious to how we can adopt this viewpoint into making sense of what we would call the atoms of space in some kind of pre-quantized or quantizable manifold that we would deal with in quantum gravity. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you for this question. Yes, I've not mentioned that, but this is the reason I've been pushed toward relational quantum mechanics, quantum gravity, as I said at the beginning. I have two answers. The first is that there is a deep relationalism in general relativity. In fact, even the name was chosen by Einstein about relativity. And the relationalism of general relativity, our best conceptualization of space-time today, regards localization, where things are. And one can also use the name systems in general relativity. A system is something which is sort of localized in space and also in time. It's easier to think something's positioned. So a process, if you want. A process is happening somewhere, some region, compact, from an initial time and a final time. And the point is that this talks very well with relational quantum mechanics, because in relational quantum mechanics, the first thing you have to do is to take the world and break it in pieces, okay? And say how one piece affects the other one. And what are these pieces? Well, general relativity is telling us, look, the pieces don't live in space-time. They are space-time. They connect one with the other by space-time boundaries. So this opens the possibility to identifying the boundary of a region with the Heisenberg cut, the separation between the system and the other system in the interaction. And this works bingo in quantum gravity. That's what we need in quantum gravity, because we're describing what happened in some space-time region from the outside, so to say, how it affects the outside. So this is because of locality, right? Interactions are local. In physics, all interactions are local. So to be next to one another is the same as to interact. And so in quantum mechanics, in quantum gravity, marvelously, the who is next to whom and who interacts become the same thing. So that's a beautiful way of thinking about quantum gravity. Quantum gravity is not about things seen from outside. It's about how space-time act on the next piece of space-time. That's the first answer. The second answer is because of this quanta of space that you very appropriately mentioned, right? If we think of the quanta of space as things, objects, which are just there, we get confused. How do we have to think about the quantum space? We have to think like the photons. A photon is not an object, it's a mode of interaction of the electromagnetic field with a screen, right? The electromagnetic field generically is not made by photons, it's a quantum superposition of photons, which is a very different thing for a philosopher, right? It's not just 10 photons or 5 photons, it's both. So it's not made of photons in a naive, mereological, classical, simple-minded things. Is that the electromagnetic field is something, the electromagnetic field in a box is an entity which interacts with whatever interacts with it by exchanging energy in packets. And that's what a photon is. So the quanta of space are the mode in which the gravitational field interacts with anything else, with a clock, with matter, with me, with another piece of the gravitational field. So to do quantum gravity, one has to have clarity about quantum and clarity about space-time. And I think that the relational view permits that, because we can always describe, take a quantum gravitational phenomenon, whatever you want, a black hole ending its evaporation, doing quantum gravity and exploding in some manner. Good. So you encapsulate this, you call it a system, you encapsulate it in a region, and you say, quantum mechanics gives the probability amplitudes of what happens before to what happened next. So how this is interacting with something before and how is this interacting with something next. I've been a bit fast here. It's a work of my life, but I think I've given the feeling of why I think this is a useful way of doing quantum gravity.
Okay, so thank you very much. Now the next in line is Diana HB or Diana HB. So you can now proceed.
Thank you, Diana. Sí. Well, first of all, thank you so much for your exposition. I'm very glad I found this event. I come not from the philosophy formation, so it's fascinating for me. I wanted to ask about what is your opinion about feminist epistemology of physics? Because that I heard about you through that area of knowledge. So I wanted to know what was your position about that, that kind of knowledge or theories, and if you find it related to your work. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana, not Diana, Diana. Thank you very much. Now, I'm going to give an answer that probably is going to surprise many people who listen, because you would expect a hardcore scientist like me, a physicalist, a naturalist, a scientist in the sense to say, oh, I have nothing to do with feminist epistemology, or a comment like that. It's a way of thinking that comes from a very different traditions. But in fact, I'm going to use a completely different answer, the opposite answer. I am not an expert, but I have some knowledge about feminist epistemology. I've been curious. I've been exposed to something. I've read some book, for instance, Barad, who talks about quantum mechanics. She uses ideas of Bohr's and sort of re-employ them in in her work about feminist epistemology. And I find all that extraordinarily fascinating and useful also for a physicist, for a number of reasons. Because feminist, let me just say some simple thing. One thing is that feminist epistemology is insisting that when we talk about our knowledge, we should not forget who is talking and the subject sort of the. And this seems to go against the sort of the traditional idea of what science is, but I think it's not at all. I think that a lot of modern science has gone exactly in the direction of realizing that the world we are describing is a world in which we are immersed, and that we describe from the inside, not from the outside. And in fact, quantum mechanics is it's a center, perhaps, of that. Even if it is already in relativity, it's already another part of physics. But in quantum mechanics, it's very strong. Quantum mechanics describe how a system interacts on another system. And if you want to see this from the outside, you're actually missing what is going in. You don't have a more complete view. You have an incomplete view because properties are relative, because what I said. So in the case of the Schrödinger cat, the cat observes something, and this is a piece of reality. If you describe it from the perspective of, Wigner aside the box, you're just missing what is going on entirely. So I find that this insistence on viewing the world from the inside, of viewing the knowledge as a part of our, so interpreting our knowledge of being knowledge of one piece of nature with respect to another one, and therefore characterizing everything we know in terms of everything we say, in fact, in terms of who we're saying, it's very deep, and it totally resonates with the kind of physics that I've been doing. So I was fascinated by reading Barrett, for instance, and other similar ideas. Again, I'm not an expert, so don't take what I say too much on the golden. But I think that there should be more dialogue. Of course, a lot of feminist epistemology comes from a very different quarters of philosophical thinking. I mean, most of the philosophers I talk about are in the strict analytical, traditional, philosophy of physics, Pittsburgh, London, Ontario, and so on. So Van Frassen and company. So it's a different universe, and it takes time and between these universes there are incredible misunderstandings. They picture one another as totally idiots sometimes because there's a deep misunderstanding of what is being said on the other side. There's much more in common and the possibility of learning than what looks at first time. So I am looking forward for learning more, in fact, about feminist epistemology.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Next in line would be Professor Graham Priest. So please, you can now proceed.
Thank you. That was a fascinating talk. I confess I'd never heard of the relational view of quantum mechanics before. I don't know a great deal about this area. So these questions are very much an amateur's, and so take that into account. I can see the attraction of the relational view because there's a certain sense in which it deprivileges the observer. The observer is just one more part of our apparatus. Okay, and that's good. But I wonder if the problem hasn't just been pushed somewhere else. Because the crucial thing is how you interpret the wave function. Okay, now you described it as epistemic or epistemological. And that could mean of various things. We might have to say more about this, but suppose you understand that in the most flat-footed way, namely it's to do with knowledge or a knower. The status of a privileged knower seems to come back into the picture. Who is the we that's knowing, okay? And maybe one way of kind of bringing this problem home is something like this. Suppose that cognition had never evolved in the cosmos. Thought experiment. then it seems natural to suppose that the cosmos, or bits of it, would have continued to evolve by the time-dependent Schrödinger equation, even though there's no cognitive agent. And that tends to suggest that the wave function is not simply epistemic, simply because there are no knowers. Okay, so that was an immediate thought.
Yeah, thank you. This goes to the core of the point. So let me try to answer step by step to what you said, and but I look forward to your reaction to all that. So the first thing you said is that it's the first time you encounter relational quantum mechanics. I'm not surprised. Relational quantum mechanics is quite old. Was born in the 90s, but the reaction to it has been very slow. And the interest of it has been growing. It was minimal at the beginning. And in fact, in spite of coming from the physicists, the philosophers who picked up first, Van Frasse is one of the first who reacted to that. And I would say it's in the last years or few years, the last decades maybe, that the interest been growing. Now there are workshops and conferences. So now, correctly, you say it's an effort to jump out of the apparent subjective aspect, and let me put it more sharply. It's replacing subjectivity with relationalism, which is obviously a completely different things, but it's an easy misunderstanding, especially in talking about physics. And let me make this example. In physics, when we talk about special relativity, nothing to do with quantum mechanics, we always use, or even Galilean relativity, we always use the word observer, right? We say the velocity depends on the observer. So if you're on a train and on the ground, you attribute different velocities to things. And in fact, when you say that something has a velocity, you have to say with respect to which observer. Okay, so it's my favorite example. When a mother says to the kid on the train, "Don't move," she does not mean jump out of the train and don't move with respect to the earth. She means don't move with respect to the train. Now, this language seems to be saying that velocity is subjective, because it depends on observer. But of course, velocity is not subjective. It's just a bad language used with physicists. Velocity is relational. The moon has a velocity with respect to the Earth, has a velocity with respect to the sun, has a velocity with respect to the galaxy in current physics, but not because the sun has any knowledge of the moon. The sun doesn't need to have to be a subject of knowledge for the moon to have a velocity with respect to the sun different than and so on and so forth. So there are relative velocities on a different galaxy where there is nobody to talk about that. Now, once this is clear, and this is just what it is a clarification of terms, and don't confuse the apparent language about subjectivity used in physics with a relational one. Relational quantum mechanics say, look, we're doing the same mistake in quantum mechanics. We interpret it as subjective, something is just relational. Now, what about the wave function? My answer to you is forget the wave function. I mean, we can do entirely quantum mechanics without ever talking about the wave function. Just forget about it. And we can talk about facts, about events, about probabilities is a frequentist. So I'm not even subjectivist about probabilities. I mean, the same situations evolve repeated a large number of time, happen to be, P1 go in one way, P2 go different ways. So no knowledge, completely objective description of what happens. And quantum mechanics can be formulated in that way. So the relations between the probabilities are captured by transition amplitudes, which can be computed not as evolution of a wave function. And in fact, this is how quantum mechanics was formulated first by Born, and Heisenberg, and by Dirac. The wave function came later. Now, nobody forbids us to talk about wave function. So I can talk about the weather on Earth and be convinced that there was a weather on Earth before humans came, and have the conceptual structure for saying, before there were humans, it happened to be the fact that if there was sunny on California on a certain day, it was likely to be sunny with a certain probability on Arizona in the next day. Okay, so use a probabilistic language. But then we can say, what is the weather forecast? Or is our discussion about predictions about the future given the current knowledge? So given knowledge we have about some, so in that sense, if we talk about our knowledge, we code our knowledge in something which we call the wave function. And we code our expectations in something we call the wave function. But this is a tool we use for describing a set of real facts that happen in nature that, for reasons that we're not discussing here, happen to follow some probabilistic regularity among them. Is that an answer to your question?
Well, that's kind of interesting, but it seems to me that you're having it two ways, because you want to talk about an agent's probabilities and so on, so that the agent is still there in a sense. But then you said, well, we can forget it, and we can just think of them mathematics. Is it true that you can do quantum mechanics without the wave function?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just read the 95 paper by 3 papers by Born, Jordan, and Heisenberg. There's entire quantum mechanics, and the wave function was not invented yet. It was invented a year later. But there's entire quantum mechanics. What happened is that the language is non-commutative algebras matrices at the time, and the physicists didn't know it. So everybody jumped on Schrödinger formulation, which is differential equations that everybody likes and loves.
Okay, look, I didn't know that. That's interesting. But if that's right, I think it's kind of misleading to say that it has an epistemic interpretation.
Sorry.
Just get rid of the damn thing.
Yeah. Sorry. Before answering, let's do, a bit of epistemic, feminist epistemology here. Where are you talking from? What is your...
I'm a philosopher.
A philosopher, which band? which religion?
I'm a logician.
Oh, okay. So good. So I know what there might be also a little bit of a terminological misunderstanding here between us, because in the jargon of the philosophers who discuss the interpretation of quantum mechanics, it's common to divide the interpretations, calling them realist wave function or epistemic wave function, depending or not whether you assign an ontology to the wave function. So you call generically epistemic interpretation everything which doesn't take the wave function realistically. But I think listening to you, I realize that this is misleading, because what is being said here is not the wave function as an epistemic interpretation. It's just it doesn't have an interpretation. It's just a tool for doing calculation, which is not. It's a very different thing. It's, take classical mechanics. Classical mechanics has an ontology which is completely clear. The non-relativistic quantum mechanics of a few particles subjected to forces. So you think there is space, there is time, and there are little balls going around pushed by forces. Fine, and that's clear. And then you say, oh, look, I can describe this using Hamilton-Jacobi theory, which is a function spread in time, and I take derivatives and I find the trajectories. Good. So what? Well, what is this function spread in time? It's a useful tool that we use for computing the trajectories.
Okay, I don't want to monopolize discussion, so I'll just say one more thing, then I'll shut up. That makes sense, but it makes it sound that you're taking an instrumentalist position. Okay, so then the question becomes, how does this view differ from just a simple instrumentalist view about quantum mechanics?
Because there's no mention about about agency, about the observer, about the macroscopical world, about measurement. It's I will interpret nature as a set of facts, which are facts that happen when systems interact. And these are relative facts, which can be described, but they are facts associated to two systems. And the way these facts are related, which are the laws of physics, so to say, you have to remember that facts are facts relative to systems. So if you, so this has to be taken into account into writing the analog of the equation of motions. And if we don't, we get confused.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Next in line will be Kasia Jaskold. So now you can proceed, please. Prof. Jaskold, we don't hear you. You are not with the...
Okay, thank you very much. I'm glad I'm next in queue because my question is also about the observer. But first of all, let me just say thank you for a wonderful talk. And my connection has improved, so I heard you. I fiddled with my computer during the break. And by the way, if any of you have any more questions about my talk, I'm happy to set up a session 20 minutes or so later on in the week and have a chat. But now, Carlo, yes, it's about the observer, because the way I look at it, I sort of I think, as I was saying in my talk, we all meta-represent what physicists are saying, but I think I understand that when you talk about breaking up reality differently, talking about it in the system, you can have different descriptions depending on which system you currently are. But I agree with the previous, with Graham, that you still have the observer, you are you. And when I look at what you are saying from the perspective of the observer and as a philosopher, I just wonder if it wouldn't be easier to get into all the nitty-gritty of physics if I questioned the ego, the me. Like in philosophy, there are these two schools. One is endurantism, one is perdurantism. One says that the ego exists fully and objects exist fully at any time. And the other, perdurantism, says that objects don't and we don't. We have temporal parts. There is no me. There are just different parts of me in different times. So if you want to get rid of the observer, wouldn't it be easier to just sort of philosophize like that? There is no me giving us this talk. There are different parts of me or different kind of configurations in these different systems you are talking about. And then I'll have this direct insight in what it is really like. So basically, that will be the way of getting rid of the observer. I just wonder what you think, if it's not the better way for us to get there.
Yes, Kasia, this is very interesting. In fact, in my book, I go into this discussion, my last book, Helgoland, on quantum mechanics or relational quantum mechanics. Let me not answer directly to your question, but answer indirectly by saying what I do in my book. In my book, I go the other way, the other direction around. In fact, in both my books, The Order of Time and also Helgoland. First of all, I think that thinking in terms of what you called the endurant, the permanence of the entity, is something that for a relativist like me, it becomes less and less comprehensible the more you study physics. I mean, there's just no sense whatsoever in it's it's convenient to put together a wave on the sea at some time and the wave of the sea on a later time and say it's the same wave. It's just a convenient. I think that Goodman put it. An object is a monotonous process. It's a process that doesn't change much. But I go stronger in the in Helgoland. Namely, I think that quantum mechanics is pushing us also to consider the subject just as a convenient naming of a composite process, a composite set of processes that that all together imprecisely make what I call myself. If you want, in the direction of a Buddhist, there's no self. I mean, self is depending on something else as heavily. Now, what I'm trying to say here is that the entire emphasis of relational quantum mechanics is that the best account that we have about reality, including ourselves, from physics, is that there is a world, and this world can be described by arbitrarily breaking it in pieces. For instance, I can say this pen and talk about this pen. This pen has some properties. It's green, it's oriented in this way, and so on. But I can also break this pen in two or in many, many atoms and describe the property of the atoms. There are many, many other properties which are not pen properties, but they're atom properties. In which sense precisely? The property of this pen are not property of this pen, are property of the way this pen interact with another object, with my telephone, or with my eyes, or with my brain. Okay, and so the pen has a number of ways of interacting with my brains or with the telephone, and there's absolutely no difference between my brain and the telephones from the point of view of physics. There are all sorts of differences for me, of course. There are all sorts of biological complexities in my brain, which are not in the telephone, but not from the point of view of physics. So I can describe correlations between the telephone and the pen. They have interacted, so they're both oriented in the same manner. Okay, and this has sent a photon to me. So in my neurons, there was something correlated to the pen. Okay, in that sense, and only in that sense, I talk about relative information the systems have about one another. Carefully, I'm not doing psychology here. I'm not doing brain science here. I'm doing physics. But I hope, I expect on the basis of this physics that brain scientists and psychologists give me a story about the rest. So the subject of knowledge here, it's considered to be a piece of the world, but only described from the point of view of physics. I'm not describing my own views of the world. I'm just doing the same job as if I, as a physicist, was looking at a photographic camera and saying, look, inside there's a picture which actually corresponded what there's a correlation between the picture and outside, and I see that there is correlation that is established, period.
Yeah, but I just wonder if you are talking to philosophers, psychologists, if it's not easier to actually start with that. There is no ego, there is no self, and if you start with this perdurantism, as we call it, then you as an observer become sort of part of what is the lack of observer. So it makes this contrast disappear, because you think from the perspective of the self, which doesn't exist. It's just, sorry, it's not my area, but neither endurantism nor quantum physics. It's just, it seems to me that it's easier to comprehend it then.
I get it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we will proceed with the question of Santiago Núñez Corrales. So you have the word now.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Rovelli. I had one question listening to your talk, and it is, in which ways, or whether it is possible using relational quantum mechanics to gain better insights into things like the correspondence principle, and more generally on both the philosophical and physical aspects of emergence, especially the emergence of new laws in the universe. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Santiago. Yeah, the debate about emergence, it's rich, right? And I think relational quantum mechanics can only say something about a specific emergence that it's the emergence of the classical world from a quantum world, if you want, which is quite a remarkable piece of emergence, but it's just that. And of course, the first formulation of that, it's more correspondence principle, which you refer to, which was not only a formulation of an expectation about emergence from quantum to classical, but also a key tool for more to devise what quantum theory should have been in a period in which everybody's feeling was we don't have the quantum theory yet. Before 1925, we don't have the quantum theory yet. Let's say everything which this theory should do in order to be good. It should do this, this, and that, and in particular should obey the correspondence principle. Now, in relation to quantum mechanics, there is a technical piece of world which is the definition of stable facts, which I don't go into the details here, but I hinted about it in my talk, which is the description of how the classical world emerges. And concretely, what happens is that you start from these properties which are relative. So the pen is it's an orientation sort of relative to is here relative to the phone, but then they call this relative facts. But then you do some calculation and you realize that when there are many degrees of freedom around, you don't need to use the relative facts anymore. You can just forget who is relative to who, and the predictions don't change. And you know exactly what are the conditions for this to happen, and these are the conditions for essentially there are many degrees of freedom around interacting, which is what the classical world, what makes the classical world. So one sees clearly how you have an emergent description by disregarding something, which is what we do regularly in our life. So what kind of emergence is that? It's emergence in the weakest possible sense. When you have levels of description, like we always have, we use in nature, if you interact with many degrees of freedom or sort of less degrees of freedom in some context, there are concepts which are extremely useful and fruitful and effective at some level, which only make sense under this approximation and in these conditions and disregarding the degrees of freedom. And so you can make a story at this level, which of course it wouldn't make sense in general at the bottom level, but it makes perfectly sense at this level. And we call this emergence. Okay, so this is how interpret emergence in physics. We see all over physics, and in fact it leads to me to the idea that we better think that each level of description is sort of a level of autonomy. We don't need to think of the bottom one as fundamental. That's my own view of this thing. We don't know what the fundamental one, but we have a good understanding of the coherence between different levels in terms of emergence in this sense.
Thank you so much. One of the follow-up questions would be relative to the definition of degree of freedom. Then, can you expand upon that to really unravel what that specific term means, or under this sort of view? Because degree of freedom usually means a variable that can be assigned within a certain range in the physical sciences, but whether one can ascribe a different meaning under this relativistic interpretation.
Okay, so degree of freedom is a very technical notion in physics, widely used, and there is a subtlety in it. So what is a degree of freedom? It's a counting of how many variables we use to describe a system. So if I have this pen and I don't just consider it as a pen that can move, and I cannot break or do anything else. I can give its position in the X direction, Y direction, the Z direction, and its orientation in around 2 angles. And that's it. So I have 5 numbers that that characterize everything I can say about this pen. And so I say that this has 5 degrees of freedom. This is what we do in physics. Now, the subtle thing, of course, is that this pertains to a description of this pen under some conditions. Okay, if I break it in 2 pieces, then I have more degrees of freedom because the 2 parts move independently. And if I look at how the single molecules move, I have many more degrees of freedom because I need many more numbers to describe it. So the notion of number of degrees of freedom, it's universal in physics. I mean, you studied first year as it was, something absolutely fixed about systems. But of course, in real systems, it's badly defined because it depends. It depends how you're interacting with the system, right? I mean, this if I pull and push them, this pen, I can give a description of its dynamic with these 5 degrees of freedom. But if I pull too much, I have more degrees of freedom because it opens up. And in fact, in quantum field theory, this is very obvious. I mean, the number of particles changes the more I put energy, so the number of degrees of freedom grows. So it's subtle as a notion because it is not really, once more, it's not really a description of the system by itself. It's a description of the ways the system can interact with the rest, the number of variables in the way the system is interacting with the rest under some conditions. There's not too much energy, or the physicist would say you don't excite other hidden degrees of freedom. Is that part of an answer?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Now we will proceed with the next question. That is, in the case of Milena Castro. You have the word now. Please ask your question.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me well?
Yes, Milena, very well.
Thank you. I'm really, really happy for listening to you on this opportunity. I try to be very, very synthetic, but I have many, many questions. Probably I would like to write to you later on or something like that.
Please do. Please do.
Thank you. I'm a biostatistician here in Costa Rica, and I'm been dragging a lot about, well, there are many things that it's been lighting up my ideas. So one of the things that you said is specifically in the empirical characteristic of a question, of a research question. And the way I like to see this is all of my papers and my models, I really, really insist in that we have to undertake like three different processes, which is a specification of the model. The second will be the estimation process, and the third one will be the interpretation of the model that you are proposing to explain whatever phenomena you are looking at. But having that you have said, let's take the wave function out. And so my question will be, which models will you propose in order to undertake the estimation part specifically? Because that looks like it's kind of the thing that everybody likes the most, and how you define the probability is very, very, and I wouldn't say subjective at this talk, I will say relational to who you are. So that how will you undertake this estimation process, but also adding this philosophical part or this discussion, especially when you define the variables? And it is actually funny that you are talking about degrees of freedom. I will actually ask if this is staying with the frequentist statistical issues or parts, or how will you interpret this in the Bayesian context, if that is meaningful for you? thank you very much. I have many other questions, but I will start with this. Please.
Okay, let me understand better. I understand the question about probability that you put at the end. When you say estimation, do you mean how to sort of confirm, evaluate, and then support the theory I have? Is that what you mean? Is that...
Yeah, like this is basically what everybody likes. It's like everybody is, I think it's more the positive way of looking at science. And if I understood your talk well, maybe it's expanding this idea, and maybe, and you have actually demonstrated in the degrees of freedom talk or answer, is that you define a model with certain parameters, but not all the parameters are inside that, because not all of the observations that you can actually observe are considered in the model. And so
okay, so okay, let me try to answer in pieces. You tell me, Milena, if I am answering or not, or if I'm going. Let me answer in three steps. The first is more general. The second is about quantum mechanics, and the third is about probability. So first of all, this is the point. Quantum mechanics is a strange theory because it's not a specific theory of something, right? It's a general structure of doing mechanics within which you write specific theories. So quantum theory is like classical mechanics. It's just, you know, the rule of the game of physics, so to say. And then in the context of quantum mechanics, you do the quantum mechanics of an atom, the quantum mechanics of a free particle, the quantum mechanics of the molecule, the quantum mechanics of the interaction on the sun, the quantum mechanics of the universe, and each one of these is a theory. So the big step in the discovery of quantum mechanics is the way you have to play these games is not as in classical mechanics attributing values at every moment to variables, but in this strange way of probabilities when there is interaction. This, I think, has to be put forward because one thing is evaluating, in your sense, quantum mechanics as a whole, and one thing is evaluating the single theories between quantum mechanics. Like QED, for instance, is a theory formulated in the context of quantum mechanics, and we evaluate it. So this is just as a preliminary step. Now, for a scientist like me, who is not perhaps, I mean, super interested in philosophy, but I'm not a philosopher. In the actual practice of science, you constantly do with data interpreted already within a scheme that are less in accord with the predictions of the theory. So the theory gives predictions. Predictions specific. I mean, you take an uranium, and the theory tells you that after a certain time, with high probability, it will have decayed, and then you check it, and you can do it remarkably even in phenomena that you haven't checked before. So you have theories which are strongly predictive about numbers, but always strongly predictive about new phenomena, even more. Right? Entanglement was predicted before even thinking of measuring it. So nobody thought that there could be anything like entanglement. The theory says, look, if you measure that and that, you will find this strange thing, and so on. So my view in this perspective is Bayesian, strongly, namely, to the extent in which the predictions are confirmed, our degree of confidence in the theory goes up. And to the extent in which it's not confirmed, I think Popper put it too strongly, our confidence theory goes down. I mean, of course, we don't think a theory is wrong just because it gives a wrong prediction. We think that we're missing something, we fake around, we do something. But at some point, if enough things go wrong, you say, no, wait a minute, this is not working anymore. So it's Bayesian. We have a machine for a mathematical machine for predicting. We collect, we continue collect information, and we check it, and the things go, the credibility of the theory goes up and down. Of course, this is complex because the interpretation of data already, as we know very well, requires a huge amount of theoretical pieces. So we never know what exactly we are questioning. You know, like Quine has emphasized, when we're evaluating a theory, we don't know, are we evaluating the theory or the other theory which we've granted around it, or it's largely everything inside. So in that sense, it's a Bayesian view of confirmation. But not strict, because we never know exactly what we are confirming and not confirming. So this is the general attitude. And of course, I think that, you know, a good philosophy should close epistemic circles, as Shimoni would say. So this entire phenomenon should be comprehensible within the theory itself. And that's why I like the relational aspect of quantum mechanics, right? Because we are not doing that as, you know, outside nature, getting data. We're doing it as species of nature which interact with the rest and collect information about the rest. So we collecting data can be described by the theory itself. Now, in all this, how do I think about probability? Because of course, all that is probabilistic. It's not yes and no. It's never yes and no. It's a probabilistic already in classical physics, but it's even dramatically probabilistic in quantum mechanics, which I think tell us that we have to be probabilistic. It's no determinism. So the best is think probability. Now, what we mean by probability, it's one of the hardest questions, and I don't dare going into it. I'm reading a book by Wayne Marrell on the interpretation of chance and probability. So every 3 pages, I change my mind of what I mean by probability. I am still tentatively Bayesian, Definitian, subjectivist in thinking about the use we do of probability in our everyday life, including in interpreting and evaluating theories, namely. What we're really doing is expressing our confidence. What would we bet if we had to bet? Something like that. I mean, that's what we mean by probability. But whether behind that, I want to think that there is a stronger objective sense of probability in the world, which might be useful for. I don't want to commit myself neither to yes or no, and you know, I listen carefully and with enormous attention to the people who think about that better than me. You know, like all physicists, I'm a frequentist when in the many cases in which being a frequency works so well. But I'm aware that I talk about probability in cases in which frequentist doesn't work. So I'm aware that, you know, probability is more than being a frequentist, and so on and so forth.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we will proceed with the next person. In this case, it is Jose Pablo Alvarado. So you now have the word. Please be concise, please.
I'm very interested in your concept of time and the relationship between quantum loop gravity. My question is, if we see a system not in space-time, but part of the space-time itself, in your relationship and your relational interpretation, the concept of time used in physics to describe change.
The sound was a bit jumping at some point. I'm not sure I got exactly the question. I think you're asking about time in loop quantum gravity, the relational notion of time, and how it falls into that. Is that your question?
Yes, is that correct?
Okay, so I did not talk about time. Kaza talked about time before me. This is a longer discussion, which I I don't have time to do here, and we have to be short. The short version is that the generativity requires us to have a more wide notion of time than the typical one in non-relativistic physics. And this wider notion, I think, can be formulated in terms of variables, which behaves from the point of view of quantum mechanics like any other. So generativity is telling us that there are many possible clocks, to put it simply. And any of these clock, it's a quantum variable that take values interacting with the others. And I think that on the one hand, this questions some naive interpretation of a global time flow, which is a relativity, but I don't think that this means in any sense, to echo what Kasia was saying earlier, that we have to take this as a statement that there's no time in nature, because nature is static, is a four-dimensional static world. Quantum mechanics is about transition amplitudes. So physics is about transition amplitudes. So it's about change. And what we describe is happenings in the world, nothing static out there, I would say.
Thank you very much. Next in line will be Kevin Picado, so you can proceed now.
Kasia is also indicating, I think, that she wants to add a finger here, some comments.
It's just very, very quickly, since you mentioned my talk, I realized that there is this equivocation here with static. So in my talk, think of static as not flowing, not as static. That would be the right interpretation. And I think then we'll agree. It's just not flowing.
Yeah, I don't think we disagree. Absolutely, I don't think I disagree, Kasia. I think you're exactly talking about the richness of the complexity of the notion of time, which on which I'm completely with you. Sorry, we interrupted the question.
Don't worry. So next in line will be Kevin Picado. So please ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so this is more of a historical question. If I heard you correctly, you mentioned that the ideas of relational quantum mechanics go back to the 90s. But some historians of physics attribute a variety of relational quantum mechanics to the work of the mathematician and philosopher Grete Hermann, which was done all the way back in the mid-1930s, I think. Would you say there's any substantial continuity between her ideas and yours, or are they only related by name?
Who do you refer to? Sorry.
Grete Hermann.
She talks about quantum mechanics, relational quantum mechanics?
Yes, she did in the mid-1930s. She went to Leipzig and worked with Heisenberg. And she, in her book, The Foundations of Quantum Mechanics, she talks about how that, well, that since the position and momentum of a particle cannot be known simultaneously and cannot be completely defined, and one cannot completely define the initial state of a system as a function of P and Q phase space. So the causal principle is not false but inapplicable. But she thinks that quantum theory already provides for a knowledge of the causes one desires. That is one that is only relative to a given experimental context.
I see. So thank you very much. I am not aware of this work, and I'm enormously interested. Can you send me an email with some references, and I'm going to look. I would not be surprised if there are some key ideas there, and if I understand correctly, is a woman. You're talking about a woman?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I mean, women idea get constantly suppressed and reappropriated by male. So it wouldn't be the first time. So please do send me references, and I'll very much look forward to look into it. Sorry for not knowing it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now proceed with the last question of the Q&A. Now is time for the question of Sebastian Hill. So please proceed now.
Hi, I know I had already asked the question, but I just have to come back again. So this boils down to this interesting discussion between Graham, Priest, and Carlo, having to do with this distinction between epistemic, well, first of all, removing the wave function and how this impinges on what we would say is all debate between psi-epistemic and psi-ontic states. So I agree that we can formulate quantum mechanics without talking about wave function. This is something that we do when we just deal with matrix mechanics or the path integral approach, and we get out the same predictions. So where I'm coming from, though, in this kind of interesting idea is maybe if we want to regard this purely epistemic state, and here I have to say that I was reading Mach yesterday, and Mach has an interesting idea where he wants to reduce all phenomena to just sensations themselves. And I think in this Machian picture, we would distinguish something happening externally as a relation between two physical objects. And when one of the objects, one of the relata is an internal state, which is part of a complex, then we would be dealing with an epistemic state. So it seems to me that, I guess, in this kind of back and forth, you know, get rid of the wave function in relationism, then what does this do with epistemology? I think the rebuttal that you could do as a relationist, well, in relational quantum mechanics, is to say that the question of whether a relation is epistemic or not depends on whether one of the relata is an internal state. And then I guess my question here would be whether you think that relational quantum mechanics, let's say, at the ground, posits just relations ontologically, and then we kind of fix to some of them the property of being epistemic or not, depending on whether they're in people's heads. But this wasn't really much of a question, more kind of just like wrapping up the way I saw this back and forth.
Yeah, no, actually, Sebastian, I'm very happy that you raised that. And in fact, even this is the last question. I think we have a few minutes more. You know, that's the core of the story. That's the core of the issue, in my opinion. And in fact, in my book, there's a lot of discussion about Mach and what he meant by sensations. And because that's, and in fact, I have an entire chapter devoted to the misunderstanding of Mach as an idealist, which is one of the key points here. Vladimir Lenin being one of the most responsible for misunderstanding empirical criticism for an idealism, which is the opposite of what Mach wanted. And I think this is where we are turning around here. Mach uses the word sensations, as you say, which is a badly chosen word, because he started sensations, of course. He is a pioneer in physiology of sensations and things like that. But then in his philosophical world and his way of analyzing physics, the word sensation goes to have a much larger meaning. In fact, at some point he goes to elements instead of sensations. Meaning that we should focus on phenomena is really, Marx is really an effort to go away from the distinction between the subject and an object, right? So from jumping away from Kant and German idealism and all, in a sense, even jumping away from human Descartes in some sense. So instead of thinking of giving for granted the existence of the subject of knowledge as a condition for everything, or giving for granted the world and then asking about that, just talk about the phenomena. And the phenomena is something which doesn't presuppose neither the world nor the subject. It's just a phenomenon. And I think you're right on spot when you say that what Mach has in mind is that we are talking about this element, this phenomena, which are relational. Okay, a relation between things. And when it happens that one of the two sort of sides of the relational is our brain, that's what we call the sensations for us, so to say. But that's my reading of Mach, and I think the immense influence that Mach has had on Einstein first and on Heisenberg. So basically, Mach philosopher, it's the roots of both great two great revolutions in science, and not for nothing, because he just questioned straight the idea of having to necessarily philosophically add to the phenomena. On the one hand, the thing by itself, Kant Nomen or whatever, or efficient Schelling, reality, or efficient Schelling subject, or Hegel subject, as he's jumping out of that. He's destroying this duality. I think let's not think. I mean, forget the self, Kasia. The self. Mark, I quote. In my book, Max saying in German, the self is done, is destroyed, is forgotten, and forget the world also. The matter, which is the carrier of the phenomena that we observe, if not to the extent in which these notions are useful to organize the phenomena in a comprehensible way, which is great. And then Einstein went to Mach and said, but if I use a notion of space which organizes my phenomena better, should I am I violating your this beautiful conversation with Einstein? Mach says no. If you use it, if you introduce a notion of space to organize the phenomena better, fantastic, just use it. That's not the point. The mistake is to put it before the organization of the phenomena. So I think this is exactly the core of the story. And to go back to the beginning of this question, your question, and answering it, there is a way of formulating the debate between quantum mechanics as epistemic versus realist, instrumentalist versus realist. I mean, that's wrong, because in my opinion, because of course we want to be realist. I'm a scientist. I'm talking about the world. I'm not talking about my knowledge of the world. But of course, I access the world through my knowledge. I'm aware of that. It's not that. But I want a coherent story in which the two things stay together without having to ground one into the other one. And I want an interpretation of quantum mechanics, which is not cubism. It's not just what an agent can say about the world, because I want to talk about what happened in Andromeda when there's no agent, and make a story about what happened in Andromeda, which is no agent. So that's why I talk about interactions. So in that sense, I strongly don't want an epistemic interpretation of the theory, okay? But this does not forces me to interpret the wave function realistically. That's the key message of relational quantum mechanics. You can interpret realistically, a la Mach, phenomena which happens when things interact. And that seemed to me the best organization of our knowledge at the light of quantum theory.
Thanks, I agree with you.
Oh, great. Doesn't happen often.
Thank you very much. So now with that, we give a closure to the Q&A. So once again, thank you very much, Professor Rovelli, for your great talk. Also, we would like to thank all the people in the public for their time and their questions. And before saying goodbye, I will proceed to remind you what is next. So in a little more than an hour from now, we will be back with a section dedicated to the philosophy of science, but it will be offered in Spanish. Wait a second, please. So yeah, the first talk will be offered at 2 o'clock here in Costa Rica, that is 1 hour from now, by Professor Guillermo Coronado, and is entitled Galileo and the Discourse on Floating Bodies, Some Methodological Considerations. Then it will be followed by a presentation beginning at 3 and 4 o'clock by Professor Jorge Vargas Calvo, entitled The Despised Role of Computability Theory in the Historiography of the Beginnings of Electronic Computing. And the section will end starting at 4 and 30 o'clock here in Costa Rica again, with a talk by physicist Kevin Picado entitled Fundamental Physical and Structural Stability, Some Philosophical Notes or Adventures in Algebraic Deformation Theory. To end the day, starting at 6 o'clock, 6 p.m. here in Costa Rica, we'll have a round table dedicated to category theory and its applications in philosophy and economics that will also be offered in Spanish, led by Professors Ronald Zúñiga, Lorenzo Bocafoli, and Jose Ortega. So now I will just repeat this same information in Spanish. Bueno, lo que quería decir es que muchas gracias de nuevo al profesor Rovelli por su excelente conferencia y a todas las personas en el público por acompañarnos el día de hoy y a su vez por formular las preguntas que han hecho. Antes de despedirme, me gustaría recordarles que sigue a continuación en el evento, que dentro de poco más de una hora, a las 2 de la tarde, hora de Costa Rica, volveremos con un bloque dedicado a la filosofía de la ciencia. El bloque comenzará a las 2 de la tarde con una conferencia a cargo del profesor Guillermo Coronado que se intitula Galileo y el discurso sobre la flotación de los cuerpos, algunas consideraciones metodológicas. Le seguirá una conferencia comenzando a las 3:40 de la tarde, igual hora de Costa Rica, a cargo del profesor Jorge Vargas Calvo, intitulada El menospreciado rol de la teoría de la computabilidad en la historiografía de los inicios de la computación electrónica. Y finalizará el bloque, comenzando a las 4:30 de la tarde, la conferencia a cargo del físico Kevin Picado, intitulada Estabilidad estructural y física fundamental, algunos apuntes filosóficos o aventuras en teoría de deformaciones algebraicas. Para finalizar el día, comenzando a las 6 de la tarde, hora de Costa Rica, contaremos con una mesa redonda dedicada a la teoría de categorías y sus aplicaciones en filosofía y economía, a cargo de los profesores Ronald Zúñiga, Lorenzo Bocafoli y José Ortega. Entonces, eso sería todo por el momento. Muchas gracias por acompañarnos. La sesión se cerrará en este momento y la volveremos a abrir dentro de una hora. So, as I was saying, thank you all very much. Now the meeting will be closed and we will be back in 1 hour for the next sections of the event. So thank you all for coming. Goodbye.